Hello, faithful Haddonfield radio listeners. Sean Cunningham here, wishing all of you a very gory and bloody Friday the 13th. One thing to remember, though, at Crystal Lake, stay out of the damn water. You've been warned.
I'm looking for you. Looking for you. I'm looking for you.
When full moons rule the evening sky, Camp Crystal Lake begins to die. With young and able counselors slain, there's just one boy that will remain. His name is Jason, and today's his day. It's Friday the 13th on USA. One hopes that these folks will get to heaven as we begin Friday the 13th, Part 7.
Hello, listeners past, present, and future. This is Haddonfield Radio, where, as always, we bring you the history, legacy, and lore of movies, trailers, and more. My name, as always, is Christian White.
And I'm Joe Francazio.
And this season on Haddonfield Radio, we will be joining you for a deep dive fan commentary journey through every single film in the Friday the 13th franchise, featuring everybody's favorite, sadistically silent, sinisterly sentient, sensationally psychotic son of a bitch, Jason Voorhees. As the small cluster of curious onlookers gathered, the local television crew quickly quieted themselves as the cameraman placed his hand gently to his earpiece and silently began to gesture to the on-air host, anxiously clutching the microphone, to be ready to roll in 3, 2, 1.
Good evening. We are broadcasting live from the set of the TV show.
And with that, the charming host began a convivial interview with the broadcast television segment's center of attention, a young, handsome, 22-year-old up-and-coming stuntman who had recently been employed as part of the stunt team for a hit network television series. As the interview eventually began to draw to a close, the well-spoken young stuntman, cannily embracing his moment in the spotlight, charismatically offered to demonstrate what was, by even the film industry's most stringent standards, a highly dangerous, yet potentially wildly exciting stunt. A show-stopping feat known in the movie business as a full-body burn. So, as the television crew excitedly readied themselves, the young stuntman, hastily clad in flame-retardant gel, summarily ignited himself on fire on camera. Within sheer seconds, the crimson conflagration wildly lurched to life and began to blaze with a searing intensity, quickly enveloping the young stuntman's entire body. He stumbled forward a few awkward steps before instinctually realizing that something was very, very wrong. As all veteran stunt performers know, fire, even under the most controlled circumstances, is still very much a living organism with a mind of its own. And as the combustive inferno began to rage with a white-hot immediacy, the protective gel almost instantaneously gave up the game, and the young stuntman began to burn alive while spectators watched and cameras rolled. He began to panic, swatting at himself and the air around him wildly, instinctively trying to quell the rampant blaze, seemingly now entirely engulfing him. The young stuntman fought desperately to grasp for what sparingly little oxygen was left unconsumed by the mighty fire, while an unimaginably vivid river of pain began its insidious flow across the surface of his once toned and muscled frame, as his flesh literally began to melt from his bones. The success of a stunt, like a full-body burn, is entirely reliant upon both seasoned experience and precision timing, and in this case, both were sorely lacking. And with temperatures nearly instantly reaching as high as 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, it only takes a very narrow window of direct exposure to end up with grave, if not irreparable, mortal injuries. It was July 13th, 1977, an otherwise ordinary Wednesday in Hollywood, California, and what should have been an exciting on-screen stunt demonstration meant to drive TV ratings became a widely reported, yet ultimately unaired, horrific calamity, which traumatized those that witnessed it and forever altered both the body and soul of the young stuntman who would go on to bear its lifetime of permanent scars. Mere seconds after he was ignited ablaze, something the young stuntman would later admit he was ill prepared for, the flames were beginning to be mercifully extinguished, and he finally collapsed to the ground. Surrounding him, an immaterial cacophony of inhuman shrieks, filtering through blistering, acrid black air, while incomprehensible levels of unimaginable pain washed over his body in dark, endless waves. As the young stuntman gasped for breath, slowly losing his tenuous grip on consciousness, he sent his final, flailing thoughts floating back in time to the peace and serenity of so many years before. Back to the warm, green waters. Back to the white, hot sands. And finally, back to the island of his youth. The young stuntman's teenage years were spent mostly shirtless and aimless on the remote North Pacific island atoll known as Kwajalein Island. Kwajalein, a secluded enclave that serves as an important part of the Marshall Island archipelago, was also at that time the location of one of many highly secretive missile defense system test sites that the post-war United States military-industrial complex had repurposed inconspicuously across the northern Pacific decades before. And if he climbed high enough up one of the island's tallest trees, on the clearest of days, he'd swear he could see the infamous Bikini Atoll damn near hundreds of nautical miles away, where Robert Oppenheimer carried out many of his notorious atomic tests during the turbulent 1940s. The young man loved to climb, and he found himself often seeking out danger, and it thrilled his senses to climb anything as precariously high as possible. Danger seemed to be in the young man's blood, and he sought out its singular adrenaline-fueled appeal whenever he could. Once, while traveling to the nearby Hawaiian Islands with his high school football team, the young man sought to impress his teammates by crawling out over the balcony of the 13th floor of the hotel where his high school football team was staying, danglingly precariously at nerve-shredding heights, over 100 feet or more above nothing but unforgiving black pavement. The young man got a secondary rush from watching his friends' faces blanch and go stone-cold pale as he tempted fates that none of the other young men would ever have been able to muster the courage for. These daredevil pursuits became something of an escape for the young man, who would sometimes skip school and hike out on his own to the outer fringes of the atoll, spending the languid tropical afternoons climbing the breadwood, soursop, and coconut trees that formed the dense outlying borders of the island's near-jungle outer edge. Many of Kwajaleин's trees grew to astonishing heights and were considered sacred by the indigenous Micronesian peoples of the Marshall Islands. And when he was high atop them, breathing in the currents of sweet island sea air, with the searing sun beating down on his smooth tan skin, the young man could very much see why. From up on high, the young man could survey nearly the entirety of the 3-by-3-mile U.S.-occupied atoll that for the last handful of years he and his family had called home. His father's nomadic employment had shifted his family from place to place and opportunity to opportunity, and by the early 70s, they had relocated here to faraway Kwajalein. During the 1960s, however, the young man's boyhood was anything but a utopian haven like the Marshall Islands. His childhood was spent mostly in the Lake Tahoe-adjacent suburban boomtown of Sparks, Nevada. And during these tumultuous early years, the young man's boyhood was beset by the incredibly limiting influence of relentless bullying, which resulted in violent physical abuse at the hands of a pack of sadistic fellow students who seemed to take great pleasure in tormenting him with extreme prejudice. Through that experience, the young man had learned intimately the currency of fear. And from a very early age, he also cultured a true respect for what it meant to be a victim. The young man's mother had always insisted he had been infamously born well over 11 pounds, making him, according to her lovingly animated tales, the single largest baby ever delivered in his birth town of Auburn, California. But that bulky size, which continued well on into his youth, did little to nothing to insulate the boy's childhood from a near uncompromising onslaught of torment and near sadistic levels of physical cruelty that would ultimately haunt the rest of his days. By the time his father decided to relocate the family to the Marshall Islands, the young man saw it as a quiet mercy, and years later, once his life had settled into a blissful blur, and he had graduated high school on the island, he found himself beginning to feel a bit of a restless wanderlust. In 1974, while informally attending college classes and trying to get some future career direction back in Nevada, the young man spotted an ad stapled to a telephone pole looking for local extras to take part in an actual major Hollywood production that happened to be shooting in nearby Reno. Days later, the young man found himself on the set of legendary director Robert Altman's California Split, starring Elliot Gould. Immediately ensconced with both the chaotic hustle and creative energies flowing all around him, the young man fell almost instantly in love with the magic of movie making, and he immediately set his sights on yet another supposed Eden on Earth, Hollywood, California. And only 2 short years after the young man arrived on the halcyon shores of Hollywood, smack dab in the midst of the swinging 70s, and just 22 years of age, the young man quickly found himself in the enviable position of actually being embroiled in steady and exciting television day work, which utilized both his natural physical abilities as well as his nerves of steel, becoming part of the well-respected stunt team on the harmlessly entertaining yet dependably highly rated CBS TV series Emergency. The thrilling, adrenaline-fueled dangers of paid Hollywood stunt work certainly appealed to the young man, as did the dependable shooting schedule and decent pay. The young stuntman quickly learned to make himself as useful as possible on set each shooting day, and to volunteer for anything he could do that would potentially end up on screen. As the 1977 season of Emergency ebbed, the young man found himself in the desirable position of being selected to be interviewed by a local television news crew. The young man saw this as yet another great way to demonstrate his growing skills as a stuntman, and also a quick way to grab a little more notice for himself in a town where you had to scrap for every ounce of attention. But that is not at all what happened. the undeniably catastrophic injuries that resulted from the horrific burns he suffered across over 50% of his entire body were immeasurably life-altering, and the ensuing recovery that followed would be torturous and 10 times worse than the injuries themselves. And for just about any of the most seasoned professional Hollywood stunt performers, a dire, nearly fatal injury like the one this young stuntman suffered surely would have been enough to snuff out the will to continue on teasing death for the sheer benefit of the entertainment of the masses. But then again, this wasn't just any Hollywood stuntman. This was a man who remained categorically determined to make a name for himself in Hollywood. A name everyone would remember. And if you've been paying attention, then you probably already know that that name is, of course, Kane Hodder. Kane Hodder spent the next 3 excruciating years of his life recovering from the horrendous burns that left lasting scars across nearly every part of his body. He also found himself re-victimized by both poor medical advice as well as his own stubborn sense of self-reliance, as Hodder continually refused to be seen by a trauma burn unit to assist in his recovery. And that led to even more physical distress, as well as a lasting staph infection that repeatedly threatened his life. At his lowest point, and seeing what he feared would be the enduring shape of his once sterling physique, Hodder even considered ending his own life. But again, that is not what happened. As time passed and Hodder finally allowed others to begin to help him heal, and once he sought out the appropriate professional medical help to inevitably reconcile the compounded damage to his body, his recovery began to gain positive momentum, and eventually, Hodder finally decided it was time to get back to work in the business he had come to love and rely on so dearly. And so, by the turn of the decade, like so many other future cinema greats before him, the early 1980s found Kane Hodder struggling tooth and nail to get traction again in the film industry as both a stunt performer and as an actor. Often clad in what became his trademark black leather gloves, meant to self-consciously obscure some of his more visible scars, Hodder endured predictable scores of failed auditions before slowly beginning to find himself booking stunt performance and even stunt coordinator jobs, along with the occasional small speaking roles in such low-budget drive-in fare as Louis Teague's super fun 1980 Jaws ripoff Alligator, as well as the quirky slapstick satire In God We Trust that very same year, where Hodder shared billing with no less than comedic legends Andy Kaufman and Marty Feldman. Hodder also expressed his growing range as a stunt performer over these crucial years, appearing in both 1984's teen sex comedy Hard Bodies, as well as in the truly underappreciated 1985 Tom Hanks and John Candy vehicle Volunteers, directed by the Wrath of Khan's Nicholas Meyer. Hodder's strongman physique and absolute willingness to do just about anything, as long as it was exciting and on screen, also opened doors for him professionally, doubling movie stars while also portraying the occasional heavy in low-budget jingoistic ass-kicker movies like 1983's Lone Wolf McQuade, starring no less than action royalty Chuck Norris, as well as the 1986 Sam Furstenberg-directed chop-socky thriller Avenging Force, with rising mixed martial arts star Michael Dudikoff. However, it would be Hodder's participation on a film project 1 year later in 1987, where a chance meeting between two men would change both of their lives forever, as well as the course of one of horror's most iconic franchises. Enter writer, director, actor, and practical special effects pioneer John Carl Buechler. Born in Belleville, Illinois in 1952, Buechler had cultivated an excellent industry reputation, having shepherded some already legendary and highly respected special effects for such cult favorite films as Stuart Gordon's Reanimator, as well as the Gremlins and Critters clone, Ghoulies. Buechler had really cut his teeth working for beloved mini-mogul Charles Band's Empire Pictures, where he had developed notoriety for fabricating incredibly ambitious effects on a shoestring budget. In 1987, the gregarious and creatively hard-driving John Carl Buechler was hired on to design and execute some sophisticated practical effects appliances on the cheap for former Halloween executive producer Irwin Yablon's sci-fi actioner Prison, which was being directed by a brash young filmmaker from Finland by the name of Rennie Harlin. One of the stunt coordinators that was also hired on by Yablons happened to be one of the stunt world's rising stars of that decade, none other than Kane Hodder. Hodder would spend long hours in the makeup chair without one moment of complaint, and Buechler took notice. The two men, two of horror's rising stars, became something of fast friends on that Prison set, and Buechler was consistently impressed with Hodder's ability to handle the stresses of wearing complicated prosthetic makeups without duress for long shooting days and nights. The two of them got on so well, in fact, that Buechler asserted demonstrably to Hodder that, should the opportunity reveal itself in the future, he would bring Hodder on board whatever he had going next if he could. Meanwhile, the year 1988 also found the highly financially dependable Friday the 13th film series predictably gearing up for yet another sequel after the previous entry, Jason Lives, had drawn dependable box office and piqued fans' interest for more. Veteran Friday the 13th franchise producer Frank Mancuso Jr., as well as associate producer Barbara Sachs, who Mancuso Jr. hired to handle the day-to-day operations for the upcoming Sixth Friday sequel, had made the critical decision to run with screenwriter Daryl Haney's unique pitch for the Sixth Friday sequel. An idea that would see the now undead Jason Voorhees facing off against a character molded nearly identically after Stephen King's iconic character Carrie White from the 1974 novel Carrie, who for the new Friday would be a telekinetic teenager with deep-seated psychological daddy issues. From the strength of his exciting pitch, Haney was hired to pen the script as the producing duo of Mancuso Jr. and Sachs made yet another canny decision to offer the job of both helming and handling the complicated special effects work for Friday 7 to none other than John Carl Buechler, a hiring which capped off what has to be the single greatest year ever for that man, seeing as how in the year 1988, Buechler contributed special effects makeup for both Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, as well as doing the same for competing franchise A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. And if that was not enough for one calendar year, Buechler also directed and created the ostentatious creature effects for the film Cellar Dweller, which I, for one, feel is one of the magnum opuses of 80s-era monster movies. And believe it or not, this was all entirely before being chosen to helm Jason's next murderous misadventure at Camp Crystal Lake. Upon realizing that the now crewing Seventh Friday was going to need a suitable actor/stunt performer to portray the Friday series' now quintessential antagonist, John Carl Buechler immediately thought of one and only one person. Once Buechler cast the brooding and intense actor Lar Park Lincoln in the role of Tina, Jason's new telekinetic antagonist, he made good on his promise from a year before and immediately suggested to Mancuso Jr. and Barbara Sachs that Kane Hodder was the perfect choice to follow C.J. Graham's well-received portrayal of the character from Part 6. And after acing a standard screen test to prove he was every inch the imposing figure needed to embody the undisputed king of killers, Hodder landed the role. And with that, this seemingly unstoppable actor, survivor, and stuntman knew that he was about to make yet another name for himself. Only this time, that name would be Jason Voorhees. As a final note, amazingly enough, 1 year before Hodder first placed Jason's now infamously iconic hockey mask over his own face, he elected to perform a dangerous fire-related stunt for the 1986 film Avenging Force, facing his former traumas 100% head-on. But Hodder was only getting started. On the set of Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, Kane Hodder bravely and note-perfectly performed yet auspicious auspicious stunt that categorically dazzled the cast and crew when, almost 10 years to the day after he suffered his near-fatal accident, Hodder successfully performed and filmed an astonishing 44-second full-body burn that not only thrilled audiences when the film was ultimately released later that year, but actually set a world record that stood for many years and continues to serve as an inspiration to fellow stunt performers while impressing and amazing audiences and fans of the Friday the 13th films all over the world to this very day. Friday the 13th, The New Blood would debut that year at #1 at the box office on its opening weekend. The fan-favorite Sixth Friday sequel grossed a healthy $20 million at the U.S. box office against a paltry budget of just under $3 million. And guess what, faithful listeners? There is still so much more for us to deep dive into as our journey through the Friday the 13th saga continues right here. This is the one you've been dying for. This is the history, legacy, and lore of John Carl Buechler's 1988 slasher sequel, Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. And Joe, I have to ask you, after all that bluster, what do you think 20 frickin' 9 episodes in to Haddonfield Radio? What do you think, Joe Francazio, generally speaking, about Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood?
This is a fun movie. It is easily not a perfect movie, but it's fun. There's a lot to like. It's like your whole intro spotlighted Kane Hodder. I mean, for me, that's easily the best part of this movie is just sort of Jason, Kane Hodder's performance, his look, and just the continuation of the, like you call him, the Revenant Jason. He's reborn again in this movie. It's interesting that he doesn't, he gets resurrected in the last movie, but it's not like that's the big resurrection. It kind of keeps happening to him in different ways, I
find it interesting that, like you just mentioned, we were talking last episode, the Jason Lives episode, about Jason as a revenant, the idea of a revenant. Well, juxtaposed against the mythology of the revenant, the idea of destroying a revenant is you bound them in chains and you send them to the bottom of a lake. Well, which is exactly what our protagonists do at the end of Jason Lives. Yeah. And yet, he rises again, which lends the credence to the idea that there is something going on
His
with
destiny.
the waters of Crystal Lake, or with the Voorhees family destiny.
Like,
Exactly.
He's going to be resurrected no matter what. It's like nature will find a way.
Absolutely.
But it's a great movie. It's if you can learn to just have fun with the sort of the second half of this franchise once he's dead and comes back, because yes, we're taking bigger leaps of faith about how things would react in the real world. So if you can have fun with it. And it's an enjoyable movie.
I totally agree with
there's
you.
a lot to kind of you can pick apart, or it's like I said, it's not perfect.
Well, I think a lot of what you might pick apart, I think generally speaking about this film, may not have totally been this film's fault per se.
No, I wanted to
go ahead.
Well, it's a strong opinion of mine for this is that if we could have actually got so they hired John Carl Buechler, right? This man's specialty is makeup effects, right? And what gets cut from the movie are all the makeup effects, right? So what he shines at was ultimately, cut. His strengths were cut. So if we could have had the movie that he intended to make with the kills that he intended for the movie and even the ending he intended, I think, it would have been much better and much more on par with the last movie. You know what I'm saying?
100%. I completely agree. And as you might know, there is evidence of the footage that was horrifically excised by the MPAA from this film that still exists. I think some of which ended up in some sort of, I guess, a VHS work print along the line.
Oh, it's just out there.
And I have to say, it makes the tragedy of what happened to this movie doubly impactful, because even through the prism of viewing that footage in that potato quality, VHS quality, you can see the incredible veracity of the practical effects that Buechler and his team actually had created for this film. They were really actually quite stunning.
And even besides the effects, like I mentioned, there were a few story elements that were cut and changed. And that footage, you can easily see it. Obviously, you can YouTube it, but the quality, I think, isn't so great to begin with, and never mind when it's on YouTube. But like I was talking about, the Scream Factory box set, the disc for this movie, has all that footage from the VHS that was found, and John Carl Buechler does an intro, kind of explains what's going on, which is awesome. And the story goes that Paramount actually destroyed the footage of all these cut scenes. So literally this VHS of the work print with the time code and stuff is the only evidence of these scenes out there, unless by some miracle they happen to find a box of film that contains these cut scenes somewhere stored away. So unfortunately we'll probably never get a great version of them, but and some fans have done clever things on YouTube where they actually, even though the quality of the footage is really bad, they'll cut it into the movie so you can kind of see how the scene was supposed to play out. It's sad. It was one of the most heavily edited movies.
I think in the entire franchise's history.
They had to go back 9 times and make edits, and it was like they were messing with them.
Especially when you actually watch some of the specific edits that in some sequences were down to less than a dozen frames.
It's almost a bloodless movie. I mean, because
it really is a bloodless movie.
And they would go back for their 5th edit, and then they would point out a scene that had always been there, but for some reason they didn't point it out to them till 5 times of watching it. So they were kind of messing with them, and it's just too bad. The movie between the MPAA and, I hate saying it, but the associate producer of Barbara Sachs.
We're going to get into Barbara Sachs.
I think John Carl Buechler's hands were tied at certain times, and then some of the other faults just comes down to the production schedule.
Really touch upon that, because it is an astonishing. Should be almost like a record-setting amount of time that this film was turned around in.
What's weird is, though, it's the biggest gap so far between movies in the franchise.
Right. Can I just say, there are only 2 years in the entire decade of the 80s that don't have a Friday the 13th film, 83 and 87.
And so what happened was they were desperately trying to make a deal with New Line back then to do the Freddy versus Jason thing, and they had spent so much time. Like it was almost going to happen, but I think Paramount was going to handle domestic, and then New Line was going to handle international, and they had this whole thing worked out. But at the end of the day, they just couldn't end up, signing on the line. But so much time basically had gone by that they had to make this movie was from beginning to end, from day one till it comes out in theaters, was 7 months.
It's absolutely mind-bending.
Right? So John Carl
if you know
Buechler,
anything about professional film production, you realize that isn't even enough time on a standard shoot to edit a movie or to
that's
film
not
a
shooting.
movie.
This is everything. Editing. It's like crazy. So he was so tied up with having to move so quickly and get so much done that sometimes, the way teams would get split up with others, second unit shooting, this and that, like that associate producer,
Barbara Sachs.
Barbara, I don't want to keep on calling her Susan, but Barbara Sachs, she, made some decisions that didn't jive with John's vision, but he was too busy himself to be able to manage all that and make the fight and try to do, so his hands were tied in so many ways with this movie that, again, I do truly feel if he could have made the movie he wanted to, it would have been a lot better.
Well, here are two quick thoughts I had. Because you bring up a handful of really interesting points there. Going back to the perceived bloodlessness of this film, juxtaposed against having someone like an incredible artist like John Carl Buechler on board to bring forth really artistically created and brilliantly conceived practical effects. Well, here's the thing, as we kind of talked and touched upon last episode as well, the MPAA at that time under Jack Valenti was less of a board that was set towards the idea of sort of policing or protecting polite society and culture, and more of a censorship board.
Of course.
And Jack Valenti's MPAA had, like you said, had a cross to bear against the entire horror genre. And since the Friday the 13th films had seemingly risen to the top based on their exposure and really started the ball rolling on these giant iconic characters that were kind of popping out of the horror genre just into general pop culture, I feel like the MPAA sort of decided to go to war against these franchises.
Well, yeah, exactly. They were getting hit hard around this time between Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, all these other big,
and all the
other ones, right? Yeah. So I think they had to try to. They just sort of had a universal across the board, like this will get out of hand if you let one guy do it. Then so it's like we got to say no to everybody and all of it, or it's just going to go crazy with what they perceived as something they really didn't want in film.
I really take a lot of umbrage with the MPAA's horrific attack on this film. I was thinking, and I had it in my notes, of all the great slashers of that era that we've covered, really the most frightening was the MPAA.
God,
they were more murderous than any of these killers.
And what I found out through this movie,
they were more frightening than Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers, and Leatherface freaking combined.
They didn't have to give reasons either.
No, there was no one else to go to.
They would just say this scene's no good, or take out these frames, and obviously they were happening during kills, but there was no real explanations or there's no dialogue.
Right.
There was you didn't get to explain or plead your case, or it was just sort of, it is what it is, and you had to do it. And
again, why I really take umbrage with it is because John Carl Buechler, his special effects that he created for this movie, while quote-unquote gory or quote-unquote extreme or quote-unquote violent, what they really are when you take all that subjectivity out of it, that they're expressions of his creative artwork. Mm-hmm. And I think to attack somebody's artwork and to limit somebody's art or limit somebody's expression, I think is just one of the worst things you can do in this world. And so it just really is sad. And it's so sad because you can see that Buechler was so excited to bring some of his wild, gregarious, creative energy to this project.
And he took this into account. He actually figured they were going to give him a hard time. And what he thought would save him at times was to make an effect so over the top that it almost seemed funny, so that they wouldn't edit it,
or even if they were to cut some, you'd still have a significant amount of the practicality of the appliance or the effect to register on screen.
He really tried to play around with it so that he thought he was doing stuff that wouldn't, or not everything would get cut, but they cut everything.
I mean, let's be real. I want to be really specific about this. Okay. We've covered now, 6 previous Friday the 13th films, and in every single one of those episodes, we touch upon the MPAA and their assault upon these films. But in the previous films, the kills, at least some of the kill or some of the action of the kills were left on screen. There are moments in the New Blood where the entire kill is removed. It's a complete cutaway or something to that effect that completely obscures it 100%. Not even one frame of it exists in the final film, and that neuters probably 85% of the reason why the audience is there in the first place.
Yeah.
The fans of these films that adore these kinds of, the artistry of these kinds of effects. And that's what I think the MPAA consistently misunderstood. It wasn't that audiences were reveling in the violence per se. They were reveling in the artistry of the violence.
Exactly.
And the MPAA, under Jack Valenti, never took the time to objectively think about that for a second, or to look at it on a little bit of a deeper, more artistic, more creative level. There weren't people, I mean, maybe there were some, but I'm sure you agree, the vast majority of fans are not reveling in violence per se. They're reveling in the safety and comfort of safe fears, of violence on screen, which is artistry.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's fun to be scared when you know it's not. You're not
safe.
Actually in danger. Yeah.
Nobody is.
There's a fun scared and a bad scared.
It's
this
the
was
same
fun.
type of misunderstanding that, like, Gene Siskel specifically had against these movies, where he saw these films as some sort of assault on the women's liberation movement of the 70s and 80s. When that couldn't have been further from the truth.
Unfortunately, these films are just a victim of the moralities of the times.
Right.
Not changing quick enough with the art form. You know what I'm saying?
I totally agree.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense. Look, I think for me, the matrix of the New Blood's success really, for me, relies on 3 individuals. John Carl Buechler, Kane Hodder, and of course, Lar Park Lincoln. I think the character that Lar Park Lincoln plays in this film, Tina, could very, very, very easily have come off as a complete joke. What sells it, in my subjective opinion, is her intense performance. She brings a lot of reality to this character that becomes more than what this character is on paper, which is an obvious Carrie clone.
Right. Yeah. That was Daryl Hanney, the one of those 2 people listed as writers. He came up when the Freddy versus Jason thing fell through. He kind of just went, well, let's keep the versus idea and do a Carrie versus Jason, basically. And they loved it, and so he kind of came up with that. But then this weird thing happened where Daryl Haney's agent goes to Mancuso and basically says, Daryl's not going to write any more of this movie for you unless you increase his pay. And Mancuso went, all right, see you later. And oddly enough, Daryl Haney has said that he never told his agent to do that. But unfortunately, he was fired. And then they come up with somebody who we really don't know, because the second name listed in the credits of Manuel Fidelo is a pseudonym or fake name, or it's someone who doesn't really exist.
And you were saying before we started recording, which I thought really interesting, really nobody actually knows who that really was. Is that what you were suggesting?
Well, I would say Frank Mancuso definitely does, because he probably hired the person or got them.
Absolutely right.
Or maybe it was even the Barbara Sachs.
But in terms of the fandom, have
no,
you ever uncovered that?
I looked, and I don't know. obviously you can always go deeper and deeper, and there's a lot of stuff out there.
I bet there's somebody listening that probably.
But yeah, if anybody knows, let us know. But I didn't see anything, that really explained it. And so that's sort of where this script came from. And again, though, I think it was a little bit of one of those movies where they had a script, but it was changing because they had little time and they had to adjust. John Carl Buechler would talk about how he would just sort of show up and find out that the Barbara Sachs, the associate producer, had just like canceled whole parts of the shoot of the movie without him knowing.
Oh my God.
And because they were just running out of time and money or whatever, and they had to move on. And these were things that were important to John, but it was just. There was no time to argue. They had to keep moving and get the movie out,
I was thinking during the course of time of preparing for this episode, if maybe one of the pragmatic reasons for hiring John Carl Buechler to both direct and supervise and create most of the special effects makeup for the film was to, what you mentioned earlier, keep him tremendously busy so that he would be less inclined to have the time to fight against some of the production decisions that Mancuso Jr. and Barbara Sachs were having to make in order to keep the entire ball rolling.
Yeah.
And as we know from all of these Friday episodes we've covered here on Haddonfield Radio, Frank Mancuso Sr. and certainly Frank Mancuso Jr. were very, very frugal producers. And they did not give a lot of wiggle room, regardless of the amount of profit these films were making in a continuum over the years. If you notice, these budgets stayed almost exactly the same from the beginning to the end.
It was part of their formula.
And that formula, and I think, and I would say, devil's advocate, on the behalf of Barbara Sachs and Frank Mancuso Jr., preserving that formula may have been part of the reason why more of these sequels continued to be made. Because even if the box office started to decline incrementally, because they really which it did,
this was continuing the decline.
But because they weren't spending so much,
it was
still all profit.
Of course, making $20 million off of a $3 million movie, even though it's showing a decline in the franchise, because at this point you got to remember, Freddy was hot. This is before this movie comes out. Nightmare 3 had just come out, and that's like pinnacle Freddy Krueger right there. And
that's why I was going to say. Go ahead.
No. So that's what I'm saying. So even though they're on a decline here in Friday, I mean they're still making $17 million. They take $3 million out of that to go make the next movie. They still have $14 million to go pad their pockets, buy their cars, and do whatever they got to do. You know what I mean?
I mean, think about it. Going all the way back to Friday 2.
Yeah.
The Mancusos and their team. They've really never spent any real capital on any of these sequels because all of the money that ostensibly went back into the production budgets going forward was from profit.
They could always generate the next movie's budget with the current movie, no matter, up to this point, no matter how bad it is. Now, I don't know when you're going to get there, but we should kind of point out, if you want to talk about the money and all this stuff at this time, that between the last movie and this movie is when they started the TV series. So Mancuso is also split.
Just in case there's someone out there that doesn't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
What exactly do you mean by that?
So, hot on the heels of other TV shows like Freddy's Nightmares, and
from that same era, building off of these slasher franchises,
Paramount wanted to see if they had any franchises that they could expand. They had a lot of luck with syndicating Star Trek: The Next Generation at the time, so they said, "What else do we own that we can make into a show that can go into syndication?" And so that's when Frank Mancuso, did the old. They made like I don't even call it a pilot. It was just sort of like a little couple scenes, a test, really like bad effects, low budget, really, really low budget production. But he made this little thing, a proof of concept, and they liked it. But again, the whole idea stemmed from the popularity of the name, because it had nothing to do with Jason. There was no appearances of the mask or anything.
It was like an antique shop.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a bait and switch.
But it did have to do with curses.
It did.
Which I find very interesting.
Where Freddy's Nightmares kind of did things tongue in cheek. I will give Mancuso credit for trying to keep this Friday the 13th series a little more respectable, just a dark story, week to week monster of the week feel. But the problem is, too many people walked away. They didn't give it a chance because they were like, "Well, where's Jason?"
Right.
You know.
And the unfair disadvantage of that perception compared to Freddy's Nightmares was, except for really one or two of the episodes in the beginnings and wraparounds, it wasn't like the Freddy's Nightmare episodes were about Freddy's misadventures.
No, right.
It was an anthology show.
Yeah.
And much like the Creep Show movies or anything like that.
Yeah. In the vein of
Tales
a
from the
Nightmare.
Crypt,
Yeah.
right? And but what you had at your benefit in the Nightmare franchise is you've got this verbose psychological character in Freddy Krueger who can guide that series, which made that particular series stand out a little bit more.
And they had actual, Robert Englund, doing Freddy.
Exactly.
They didn't do the old, I
really
can't get the guy from the movie to do the TV.
You really can't really have Jason do your, quippy wraparounds because he's mute.
I will say, the show had some success at first. But what
As a curiosity, I think.
But what I think kind of killed them too was as Paramount... because Cuso will say, at first, they didn't say boo to them. They were on late at night. They let them do whatever they wanted. He wanted to shoot there's a quote where he's like, I wanted to shoot black and white, I shot black and white. I wanted to do a 2-part episode, they do it. But then they start getting some popularity. Paramount starts watching it, and they start bringing it to an earlier time slot, thinking it's going to get a bigger audience. And although it does reach a wider audience, what it also does is start to upset all the parent groups, all the Christian coalition groups, because now it's sort of a little more... It's on when kids could see it.
They already had, again, an axe to grind against the Friday movies, but those were in the movie theaters.
Right.
This was these depraved horror stories coming into your living room.
Right.
And that's what really, kicked the hornet's nest.
And once they tried to bring it to primetime, airings, then it was sort of all over. They were getting just hounded, bad press. They were getting ripped apart by all these different groups. And then now they lasted for 3 seasons, which I want to point out that's not bad.
That's really good.
I mean, look at a classic like Star Trek, a Paramount thing. The original series was only on for 3 seasons, and so sometimes legends can be born from something like that. And unfortunately, this didn't go that route, but. What also didn't help is after season 2, they lost the male lead. That the guy wanted to go on and do other things because the show was, kind of mixed.
And he did. He shows up in a lot of places in the late 80s, early 90s. He didn't exactly become a household name movie star, but yeah.
And I want to point out that when it aired that...
Fun fact.
Here's a fun fact. That when it aired other countries, it was known as Friday's Curse.
Oh, I love that.
Well, which a lot of people kind of say, if they had actually named it that... Even here, it might have taken a little bit less of the sting away when people realized it wasn't about Jason.
Well, I was sort of speculating that perhaps Mancuso Jr. Now, first of all, Barbara Sachs, this is where Mancuso Jr. basically groomed Barbara Sachs. She was running that television series, and that's what led Mancuso Jr. to have the confidence to have her run the 7th Friday movie.
Yeah.
But...
That's also where we'll touch on it a bit more later, but the music for part 7 is no longer Henry Manfredini.
Harry Manfredini, right.
They used him... Did I say Henry?
I think you did.
Okay, I'm sorry. Harry Manfredini. They used...
I was going to let it go.
Listen, guys, you're going to realize when you watch the show, and this is me in real life, I am so bad with names.
So true.
I will meet you, and then 2 minutes later be like, what was your name again? So, anyway. They used some of Harry's music in the movie, but the guy who would come in and do any original music for part 7 was a guy named Fred Mullen, and he would go on to do part 8 soundtrack, but where he started from was scoring the music for the TV series.
It's also like going back, it's like we've returned to part 5 again with Harry Manfredini, where in part 7 we're essentially recycling his leitmotifs throughout the film and his themes that excites the audience. And hey, you can hear that type of music right on our episodes for a very specific reason, is because it's the soul of these movies. Yeah. And so it is ostensibly important to these films. And so I'm not trying to knock Henry Manfredini, but I think some of what Fred Mullen brought a lot of people don't like his very sparse score on the opening credits. I actually think it's really cool.
Yeah.
I actually like those like drum hits or whatever,
Yeah.
synth drum hits. I think it's kind of spooky and cool. So I like some of what he brought.
When we get more into the episode, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the decisions that went into the Harry Fred thing. But on the TV show, I also want to point out, like, they had David Cronenberg, come in and do an episode. Like, they tried to really elevate their...
Which is not the only time David Cronenberg is attached to this franchise.
And the series was also one of these things where, Mancuso is kind of trying something. And a lot of the people that were put on the show were either... It was like a real mix of, like, he'd pull in some veterans, like Tom McLaughlin, who... directed part 6, was brought in into the series eventually to direct and write stories and stuff. But there are a lot of producers and younger people who are kind of cutting their teeth on the show. And on a personal note, I got to interview one of the producers from the show, and I asked him about it briefly. His name is J. Miles Dale, and he was a producer on the horror movie Mama more recently, which is why I was talking to him. But then when I saw he did the show, I was like, can you tell me about working on the Friday the 13th series? Like, what was it like? Was it weird because of the movies and this and that? And he had told me that it was like a real sense of just learning, of everybody kind of like figuring it out as they went, and how do you do a show like this, because there was no format. It wasn't like a soap opera or a normal sitcom, and they couldn't even do, like we talked about, like they weren't going to do what they did in New Nightmare. So there was like a lot of like, how do we kind of figure out the tone and the feel and do this by a lot of people who really weren't seasoned,
Right.
And I don't know, maybe that was a little bit of the problem too in there, that they didn't have totally strong back end people. But either way, we got to point out, this is when they did the series. It was kind of between these two movies, and I think it was still airing when this movie came out.
I'm sure it was, absolutely. And going back for a moment to the original idea for The New Blood, you had mentioned it earlier, that they wanted to explore this Freddy versus Jason angle.
Yeah.
That ultimately they would have to wait another long
15 years.
Almost 15 years to see come to realization. And if you guys are interested, our season 2 finale is actually Freddy versus Jason. We placed that episode as the bridge between season 2 leading into our Friday the 13th films. So if you want to hear all about the incredibly elaborate development history over those 14 or 15 years, we cover it in that episode, right? Am I right?
Can you imagine, though, if they had done Freddy versus Jason at that point?
I can't stop thinking about that. The potential of that.
When both, like Robert, but when both of the characters were at their sort of peak.
Now,
you know what I mean?
I might disagree with you there. I think in terms of the era, yes, you're right. I think in terms of legacy, I still think, here's the thing. At that exact moment, I think one of the major reasons why that team-up didn't happen is by 1987, 1988, it became pretty clear that Jason needed Freddy much more than Freddy would have needed Jason.
Right.
And I'm strictly speaking in terms of the economics of these franchises.
Well, and again, at this point, Nightmare 3 was the last one, and that was such a high note.
That was the highest
It was universally loved by,
really where Freddy Krueger had escaped even from the horror genre into, general pop culture.
Yeah, exactly.
And it had been adopted by the MTV
generation. He was everywhere.
He was like the literal mascot of the late 80s.
Yeah.
Of the American late 80s or Reagan's 80s.
Yeah.
And so I think culturally speaking, Freddy's currency as a character at that specific time might have been more lucrative than Jason's. And I would say ultimately, I think even though it would have been amazing to see Kane Hodder's Jason face Robert Englund's Freddy at that time, at let's say 1990 or 1989 or 1988, right around there, of course everyone would have turned out. It would have been a big box office hit, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it would have been the movie everybody thinks it would have been.
Well, it would have been very different from the approach they went with later.
It's hard to speculate.
It'd be much more of an all-out, I think, just more of a fight than, the other one's almost a little bit of a psychological, like them messing with each other. But
by the time it happened, you had so much more of Freddy's mythology that had
Jason,
developed
in a way, because of
see,
the next couple movies.
But by 1988, Jason's story and his presence in culture had been like twice as long as Freddy's.
Right.
When you consider Freddy only came in around 1984. He just came in with such velocity.
It's telling that it was the team up doesn't happen 15 years later until New Line are the ones who can afford to buy the rights to Jason.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So because they, I think were the ones that stepped away earlier. They wanted sort of control, a little more control in this whole situation, and it wasn't until they knew they could have it that they, made the team up happen.
Absolutely right.
So yes.
Now, before we continue on and talk about some of the movies that were in 1988 on the movie landscape, let's just take a few minutes because it's so important when you look at this film. Let's take a few minutes to specifically talk about the look of Jason Voorhees this time around. Personally, for me, for the second half of the films, this is my favorite look of Jason by a long shot. What do you think?
I love it. It's easily the my favorite part of this movie is just sort of Jason in general, but especially the way they did his face. There's although you're only seeing like Kane's like one eye, and Buechler designed this a beautiful appliance for his mouth that allowed him to move Jason's, toothless sort of jaw around. And so what I love is that you get Jason, like monster Jason, but a human emoting through it,
where you can actually see the human face, the real kind of practical human soul coming through.
As much as I love
not just those
Savini's
dark eyes.
work in like part 4, ultimately when Jason is unmasked and takes the hit to the head and slides down the machete and all that, there's not a person under there.
Yeah, you're excited by is the sheer incredible nature
amazing.
Of the effects.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking it. But when there's somebody in there and not in there. So I love that we get this beautiful appliance and that, you see this, like, when she cracks the mask off his face and you see Jason turn around and look at her like, what the fuck did you just do?
Yes.
Like, are you kidding me?
Because really, that is one of the first times in 7 films, that one exact moment you're referring to, perhaps the greatest moment other than maybe the sleeping bag moment from the whole movie, when Tina explodes that mask off his face, that acting, and I really want to stress that word. When I'm speaking about that moment, it's Kane Hodder's acting that blows my mind.
You got to make the difference between a stunt guy and a stunt performer. Okay.
Exactly.
So there's certain stunt guys that just do stunts and they don't even try to act at all. But Kane's in that other camp where he can do the stunts, but I'm not saying he's like a thespian actor, but
he's a very charismatic person.
He can do what is required during a stunt to add some acting and make something a little more believable. And he doesn't just jump through the window. He can add fear to what he's doing.
If you look at some of the instances of Kane Hodder's stunt work as he was moving through the 80s, the stuff that ends up on screen, his work has so much bravura and so much personality, so many stunts, like it's like a lot of people will say, great stunts and great special effects are things you really shouldn't notice in the course of a story.
Right.
It's hard not to notice Kane Hodder. And I don't say that detrimentally. It's just he's so physical, he's so athletic, and so thinking in character that every little aspect of the physicality that he brings to Jason's character feels so fresh and alive and exciting and dynamic and even more frightening in a way than ever before.
it's part of the thumbprint of these movies. Although there's a lot of types of movies you want to say, well, the effects should be secondary to story. They should only help support story, and they should in every movie. But part of the thumbprint of Friday the 13th movies are the makeup effects, and so you have to take that into account as something more than just support for the story in these types of films. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So when also you can get now to the 7th installment of a franchise, like, think about that, especially back then. You know what, besides James Bond, and I don't know, there wasn't a lot of 7th installments. So for them,
John Carl Buechler even makes a couple anecdotal jokes in some of his interviews where he was like, I can't believe I'm being hired to make a 7th film in a series. Like, what is that even?
So when you get to the stunts and makeup effects for a 7th installment of a franchise where those are two of the hallmarks, to be able to have guys like John Carl Buechler and Kane Hodder come in with ideas that kind of make a lot of the same old fresh again, that's amazing talent.
And yet at the same time, like I mentioned in my introduction, I think Kane Hodder very cannily sort of builds on what C.J. Graham brought physically in the previous entry. Mm-hmm. I think there is a lot of connective tissue between the portrayal of Jason by C.J. Graham in Part 6 and Jason by Kane Hodder in Part 7. They kind of look like the same guy, where I think, look, objectively, even the deepest fans out there, you have to admit, by the time you get to like Part 6 and Part 7, at least, maybe I'm the only one, I have to say. Maybe I can't assume it's everyone. But I don't really think Jason looks like the same person he looked like, let's say, in like Part 3 or Part 4. I think that was a tall, kind of lankier Jason, whereas when you get to C.J. Graham, and especially Kane Hodder, you get this broad-shouldered, more bulky, kind of more impactful physicality that, like you were saying, brings this new kind of exciting characterization. And it's also funny that 7 films into a series, and the actor that is most identified with your movies is only now being introduced.
Yeah, I guess we should point out that he does Jason 4 times ultimately. He will play Jason till the end of, till they do the reboot. You know, he'll do this, and Jason Goes to Hell, and Jason X, and obviously Jason Takes
And then
Manhattan.
he even did the Friday the 13th video game years later.
So he's the only guy to do Jason more than once. And I guess I was going to save it for the episode, but fun fact, C.J. Graham was supposed to play Jason again.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes, and so John Carl Buechler had to convince Frank Mancuso Jr. that Kane Hodder would work, because when he sort of showed Frank pictures of Kane and said, like, well, this is the guy I'd like to do it, Frank Mancuso's initial reaction was like, well, he's too small. And so what John Carl Buechler did with Kane, and this was the only time this has ever been done for Jason, they did a screen test. Jason's only ever screen test. He went and filmed on his own and got Kane Hodder.
Did you watch it?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
And he got Kane Hodder in the makeup and everything, and then he showed that to Frank Mancuso Jr. and he said, okay, yep, he can do it.
In that screen test, something that completely stood out to me, that really is emblematic of the difference that you were just bringing up between, like, and not detrimentally so, but like an everyday stuntman and a stunt performer, an actor like Kane Hodder.
There's literally, I think, a difference in that job.
Exactly.
Titles,
Well, Kane is like knee deep in the waters of, I guess, ostensibly the waters of Crystal Lake. And apparently, I guess I'm going to be using the word ostensibly for this episode, since I've already used it about 33 times. So if I say it again, you're going to hear this.
Oh, there's the horn, folks.
There it is. There is the Art the Clown horn for all of the new fans of the Art the Clown horn in our episode.
Can you tell we are the generation?
My mother.
We're the generation that grew up with Pee-wee's Playhouse. It's like word of the day over here.
But anyway, what I was going to say is this. Kane Hodder in the screen test, if you guys have seen it, he's like knee deep in the water. Before they roll, he thinks to bend down and pour and just pour water all over his body and over his head, because he knows instinctively as a performer it's going to look better on camera. It's going to give a better image and going to make a better impression on Mancuso Jr. and Barbara Sachs. That's the difference. That's acting. That's thinking like an actor.
There's no doubt Kane Hodder is an all-in guy. You know what I mean?
From
when
birth
he's doing
to
something.
death. 100%.
As much as they, there are always safety measures and stuff because he's a stunt guy. He still will. I mean, as we go on through this episode, and during the movie, there's a million of the stunts where he was like an inch or two away from, hitting the thing that would have killed him, or you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Type of thing. But he's amazing. And if for some reason you're listening to this episode and you did not see our season 3 premiere episode for the original Friday the 13th movie, Kane Hodder actually introduces that episode for us.
He was kind enough to record an introduction, which I've got to tell you, for me, it was one of the most exciting things I've ever experienced creatively when Joe just casually texted me one day before season 3 started. Oh, Kane Hodder recorded a little opening for our season.
Well, and I have...
mind blown.
Wait till you see when this episode airs.
Oh, very exciting. Looking forward to that. Always something to look forward to. Before we jump into the movie, why don't we talk a little tiny bit about some of the movies, the landscape of movies surrounding Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, in 1988.
88 continues the 80s,
God.
trend of just as you say, bangers of movies
it's
left
all
and right.
Bangers and
left
big
and
swings.
right.
Every single year of the 80s, it never ceases to amaze me. It is just banger after big swing after banger after big swing, end over end. I will never... And then, what's funny? You get into the 90s, and the 90s in its own way is also a very fascinating decade for movies.
And a big transition for the horror.
Yeah.
Things really start to change in the 90s.
I can't wait to sort of get into some of that, the 90s and the 2000s, in terms of the Friday the 13th franchise in the later episodes. It's very fascinating stories behind some of those films. Joe, why don't you hit us with some of the just general films of 1988?
Well, the number one film was Die Hard. Come on.
Really quick, let me ask you the quintessential question people ask each other when the movie Die Hard comes up, and that is, do you find Bruce Willis attractive?
Oh, wow. Well, I don't kiss and tell.
All right,
which is why we're not going to talk too much about, asked me to the prom the last episode.
Right.
And everyone has been curious. We've gotten messages.
Freaking breath.
Did I say yes? And all I will say is this. I don't kiss and tell.
Wow.
Okay, I'm a gentleman.
Unfortunately,
you guys take that however you want.
Unfortunately, I do kiss and tell, and I banged Joe in the limo after the prom.
Let me just say, a lot of heads turned when two 50-year-olds walked into the high school prom.
Yep. Then Chris Hansen walked in.
They didn't let us stay too long.
No. But it was weird. It was a magical night. I'll never forget it.
I know.
So why don't you hit us with a few?
Another amazing one.
No. The question though is for real.
What?
Do you think Die Hard is a Christmas movie?
No, I don't think it's a Christmas movie, but I will say this, that it plays better at Christmas if it happens to be Christmas time. I think it makes you feel almost like you're in that world, because it's such it's Christmas. There's a lot of background Christmas elements, but I don't think it's a Christmas movie.
I think Christmas is actually a very brilliant element that the writers and John McTiernan and the director introduced, because it is universally understandable and joyous. To juxtapose this tense thriller, goat action movie within the framework of the Christmas season just made this interesting, original action film.
When you have people being held hostage, shot at, and all that, with just some Christmas lights or trees in the background, it's like you literally you're visualizing, you see happiness as a visual thing in the frame against the negative stuff. But anyway,
I couldn't agree more, by the way, with your answer about whether it's a Christmas movie. You took the words right out of my mouth as well. Let's continue on.
Rain Man, another big one.
What do you think? You like that one?
I mean, I don't sit there and watch it a lot, but it's, I can see why it's considered a classic.
I might have to catch up on that one. Of course, I've seen it and I know it. It's
the thing is this,
film.
Tom Cruise kind of...
Yeah, you're not a big Tom Cruise fan.
I
love Tom Cruise.
And he's kind of an asshole for most of that movie. I feel like...
Well, that's a character.
No, but I feel like it's so close to how he really is in my...
Do you know him?
In my head.
Oh,
in my head.
Well, then there you go.
That's how he is.
Oh,
but
for
anyway.
Christ's sakes.
Well, anyway.
Anyway, continue. Let's give us a couple others.
Akira. came out. I mean, if you
Katsuhiro
want to get into
Otomo.
some Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Big, a comedy, one that's close to my heart from growing up as a kid at this time was the Naked Gun movie. The first one with Leslie Nielsen.
Classic.
It is just so funny.
One of the funniest movies ever made.
A Fish Called Wanda.
And really quick,
Yeah.
I have to break your heart if you didn't already know this.
Well, I know.
But
The
here we
remake.
are in 2025,
Yeah, I know.
and there is about to be a remake of the Naked Gun with Liam Neeson in I
Yeah.
guess the Frank Drebin Jr.
Right.
role.
Oh, who cares? I mean, like, I love
Just
the movies, but
what
like,
a
who
bad
cares
idea.
anymore to do us? Anyway, let's
Yeah,
move on.
continue.
Fish Called Wanda.
What a classic!
Coming to America.
Oh.
Mississippi Burning.
Oh.
I don't know if you call it a classic, but Willow. I was
A
one of the
total classic.
the few people I loved Willow when it came out. They Live. I mean, come on. If
we'll
you
cover that under
you
horror.
want Midnight Run is again a classic.
Ooh, one of my favorites, Heathers.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
I love that late 80s, both Christian Slater and Winona Ryder in the late 80s.
Scrooge, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
I remember seeing Scrooge at Foxborough Movie Theater.
Mm-hmm.
What was it, 1988? So I was 13 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and I specifically, in that movie, I got to watch that movie again, because I remember that movie being a
It was
banger.
good. Funny, really quick story. I brought that up the other day. My wife is 10 years younger than me, and I was making a Buster Poindexter reference. She had no idea who it was. I'm like, the cabbie and Scrooge, and she's like, I've never seen Scrooge, and I practically divorced her right there.
That was it.
So get ready, ladies. Anyway, sorry, honey.
Now that she knows that I banged you after the prom, she's going to now be divorcing you.
Yeah, things are weird.
So, The Last Temptation of Christ, a
Yep.
very controversial
Very.
film by one of the world's greatest filmmakers, Martin Scorsese.
Yep. Adventures of Baron Munchausen.
Ooh, one of my favorites,
really?
Bloodsport.
Yes, classic.
I don't know what you think. I love some of the early Jean-Claude Van Damme films.
And the great
I
thing
love
is
the
you watch
story
it
of
and you're
Frank Dukes.
and he's getting like those fights are they're not all staged. You know what I mean? Film
Right,
stage.
right.
There's some hits going
Yep,
on in there.
yep, it's a great film.
What else we got here?
Bull Durham. Oh, Dead Ringers, David Cronenberg.
Child's Play.
Yep, we're going to get to that in the horror section.
Young Guns.
Oh, what do you think of the Young Guns movies?
I haven't seen them since I was young. But
I really loved both of those films.
Yeah.
But I
I
actually,
liked
be
them back
honest with
then.
you, I prefer the second film.
You know
It
they're
has
doing
a-
another
it has
one,
a-
right?
Yeah, which is really, again, hello, Emilio Estevez.
Old Guns.
Hello, yeah. The movie is literally called Young Guns,
Yeah,
and
I
you're
know.
making a movie about a bunch of old men. Like, come on, man. Just make a new project. Come up with a new idea.
Frantic.
Oh, Harrison Ford
Yeah.
and Roman Polanski.
Yeah.
Actually, a really quirky, strange thriller. If you haven't seen it, it's also one of Harrison Ford's, actually one of his greatest performances.
And he doubled up that year with Working Girl also coming out. Yeah.
Wow, he was busy.
What else? The Accused.
Hit
that
us
was
with a
that was a
couple
big
more.
one.
Couple
back
more.
in the day.
Oh, Gorillas in the Mist.
Yep. Running on Empty.
My God.
The Great Outdoors. Oh man, I love that.
It's funny, I mentioned Volunteers
Yes.
earlier, John
Yep.
Candy.
Yep.
It's so sad that there are a lot of people living on the earth right now that were not alive when John Candy
know.
was a thing.
I know.
And I feel like some of the younger generations don't even really know John Candy's legacy. And that's so sad to me because one of the funniest and yet also one of the funniest actors, but also one of the most dramatically funny actors. He could switch that on
exactly,
a dime.
yeah.
What John Candy always did so well, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles
Exactly.
is like the perfect example of it. He makes you laugh and laugh and laugh, and then he makes you feel bad for it at the end.
Yep. He doesn't ever give in to the
Like fat guy falling down.
right. Exactly. It's so
See, it's like
wonderfully played.
Chris Farley sort of embodied a lot of the John Candy mystique, but without a lot of that on-screen darkness that colored the contours of John Candy's comedic performances, sometimes into much deeper and darker emotional places.
Even going the other way, him and Uncle Buck, again being funny, but also, act a very endearing,
Yep.
caring character
Yep.
this time around. Yeah, he was great. He was great. More people should.
He could play a very over the top funny character while always preserving the humanity.
Right.
He would never.
He doesn't
turn
make
into
a joke out of the
cartoon.
character or the situation. He played it right.
Let me hit you with a
yeah, and
couple.
then of course then we got we're gonna get to some of the horror ones like
Let
Hellbound.
me hit you with a few. I'll throw.
Yep, do it.
Right off the top here in this list I'm going through, which I think is off of IMDb. Hellbound, Hellraiser 2.
Yeah.
Now I adore Hellraiser 2. It doesn't reach the heights of Clive Barker's original film, but that's only because the original film just reeks of Clive Barker and is just so Clive Barker.
Gritty.
That I think the second film, while it's a more elaborate, bigger film, it doesn't have the subversion of the first film that I found so kind of titillating. But still, great film. Let's see. Night of the Demons. Great film. That's a banger. Child's Play. Oh my God. Of course, 1988,
Yeah.
we get one of the great horror icons in Chucky.
Yeah, and at the age we were at back then, it was perfect to have that sort of the kid element to the movie.
Absolutely.
Because you really identified. You still, you were young enough, but then it all goes horribly wrong, or the idea of your toy, coming to kill you. My God.
I mean, you have to admit,
it was great.
because I know specifically in my own childhood, I can remember vividly times where I used to literally pray that my G.I. Joe figures would sort of just animate themselves so that I could almost make little movies, because when I was playing with action figures as a child, I was already so in love with movies with movie making.
I would use a still
that's
camera.
what action figures were for me.
Same thing. I still have a whole photo album where I would set up my Star Wars figures, and I would get the still camera, and I would do things like, I would do like Jabba's Palace, and I'd go boil a bunch of water, and then I would pour it under the figures so there was just steam, and I'd quickly take a picture. And, that was, the beginning of me slowly making little home movies and everything else with them. But yes, I did also always think of my toys in a very cinematic way, sort of.
I mean, and I would have elaborate, long-running sort of storylines.
Yeah.
That each subsequent day I would continue building these stories. And I feel in many ways in my adulthood that a lot of the creative impulses that I've developed throughout my life that literally have led right here to this moment recording Haddonfield Radio really started out in the sandbox with my action figures.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
That's where I started really making stories. And I know, a lot of kids just play with toys, kind of, throw them around and play with them.
This is what you do when you didn't have other friends to play with.
But
no,
hey,
I'm kidding.
I'm not. That was
No,
literally
that was the
my
same
life.
way, yeah.
That was the truth for me.
Yeah. Oh.
And I would talk to the figures, and they were I was directing them.
I still I have an unhealthy obsession with action figures because of again, they were my friends as kids. You see, look, us right now, there's figures literally all around us because I still buy them.
My two greatest comforts at that age, around 13, 14, or 12, 13, 14, were my collections, whether it was toys or magazines or things, and my little 12-inch television that I had in my bedroom that I watched movies on and television, and it just exploded my imagination and literally led me to right here. So it's very special. I got another one for you from 1988. This is a movie that you guys out there, all the real hardcore horror fans, you guys are all going to cheer when you hear this. How about Chuck Russell's remake of The Blob? That movie,
Kevin Dillon?
Yes. It has some of the gnarliest practical special effects of that entire era. I think the remake of The Blob by Chuck Russell, who's connected to the Nightmare on Elm Street films, he wrote Part 3, Dream Warriors, co-wrote with Frank Darabont and Wes Craven. He directs the hell out of that remake, and it has just a real energy to it. And about a couple years ago, probably 2023, I said, let me watch that 1988 The Blob, see if it holds up. Boy, did it ever.
Nice.
The effects in that movie, even now, look like they were created last year. They literally look state
I'm
of the art.
surprised that they would hold up.
They beyond.
You don't
hold
think
up.
they actually touched them up as one of those films
No,
that they?
I don't
okay,
think so.
okay.
I just think it's just and you know what? I'm going to do a pinned comment if I remember. I want to look up who created those special effects
Sure.
because they are so fundamentally incredible,
I
and I
guarantee
can't think of it.
It's probably one of just the classic '80s effects guys.
Absolutely,
right?
I just can't think of who it was.
Yeah. Anyway,
But anyway, let's move on. Here's one that a lot of people maybe might have slept on during that era, but it made a big impact on me, was this movie called Waxwork.
oh,
Remember with Zach Galligan from Gremlins? And they go into like the wax museum, and then at night, like all the horror wax figures all come to life. And it's actually a very violent and bloody, and I think there's a moment where like you see like a body has been like 3/4 of the way eaten by like a vampire. It's all chewed up.
was there like a recent remake or? Maybe I'm thinking of something else. Anyway.
I don't know. I'd have to think about
Nothing,
that.
yeah.
Of course, we mentioned in the intro, John Carl Buechler. He worked on Nightmare on Elm Street 4
Right.
that year. We have one of my, literally, not just one of my favorite all-time horror movies, but literally just one of my favorite movies of all time. Don Coscarelli's absolutely legendary frickin' banger, Phantasm 2. Or as some people know it, Phantasm 2, the balls are back. And I think in some territories that might have actually been the subtitle connected to
Really?
the sequel. I think it was used more as a tagline, and I could be wrong about that. It might have just been the tagline on the poster,
Yeah.
but I have a memory of it being used somewhere in marketing as like the tagline of the movie.
Right.
Which works.
Like the subtitle for
Yeah,
the movie.
yeah. But I don't know what you guys think of the Phantasm films, but all I want to say is sometime along the line of Haddonfield Radio's history, I hope we might be able to delve into the Phantasm franchise because it is one of the most unbelievably eccentric and beautifully original horror franchises that
How
has
many-
ever existed.
how many
I think
movies
there's
were there?
Maybe 4 or 5.
Okay. Yeah, I
I
don't think I
could be
saw
wrong.
Beyond 2, truthfully. And
Those
and
first-
those were a long time ago.
The
I would
first
love to catch up on
3
that.
are bangers.
Yeah.
That second one in particular, and there's a scene in the first Phantasm that's one of my favorite scenes from horror history, and it actually has nothing to do with anything horrific. It's the scene when Reggie Bannister and the other 2 stars of the movie are doing that little acoustic song together on the porch.
Yeah.
It's just one of my favorite moments of really any movie ever. And it made me really fall in love with Reggie Bannister as an actor and performer. And then jump forward to 2005, and Joe and I had the awesome opportunity to meet Reggie Bannister out at the San Diego Comic-Con. And he was every bit the legend I had always hoped he would be. And just, I love that movie. Let's do a couple more real quick, because I know this is a fun part of the episode for a lot of people. George A. Romero's Monkey Shines. Do you remember that one? It's about a paraplegic. He hires like a care animal that's like a cute little monkey. And of course, the cute little monkey is a psychopath. And he's completely paralyzed. So it's sort of almost like a riff on almost like a Hitchcock film.
Yeah.
My problem with it, even though, as you guys know from listening as faithful listeners, you know I adore George Romero and his oeuvre. But I can't really watch that movie. The reason being, I have a real sensitivity towards anything to do with like depictions of violence towards animals. And I don't know if that monkey dies. I'm assuming it probably does somehow in the movie. But even if the monkey is the bad guy, I don't really want to see a movie where an animal... I don't find any entertainment value is what I'm trying to say in animals being hurt.
I'm curious. I know Jaws was always one of your biggest films. Does it bug you about the shark getting killed at the end? Does that...
No, because I'll tell you why. Because I see that on a mythological precipice as Jaws representing like a monster. And the hero has to slay the dragon, has to defeat the monster to have his or her cathartic growth. So while I'm not crazy about it, quite honestly, it's a justified ending in that case. But like we've talked about when we've covered the Halloween films, there's numerous examples of Michael Myers.
The dogs.
And it always bothers me.
Yeah.
And yet it brings me something, it makes me remember something. One of the things that Kane Hodder brought to Jason, which is directly related to what I'm talking about right now, it just occurred to me in my research. there was supposed to be a scene in Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, where a dog sort of comes at Jason and is like barking and barking like at Jason, and Jason just kicks the dog and continues moving on. Well, Kane Hodder literally refused to do that. And he said, it's not that I have a problem with it as a performer. I just don't believe Jason would do that. And not only that, he demanded that from that point on, that is not something that Jason is going to do. Jason doesn't abuse anything other than humans.
Right, right.
And I just thought that was very interesting. And it drives this interesting wedge between Michael Myers and Jason, where we're so used to seeing them in parallel. That's one of the little differences between them that popped up this film. Yeah. Anyway, here, I'll give you two more and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
Let's pick a... Oh, my God. I know I've talked about this movie before, but only because it hasn't been as widely seen as other films. I want to bring it to you guys' attention one more time. 1988. It was generally looked at as a Nightmare on Elm Street ripoff, but it really isn't. It actually is a really, really great film. It's called Bad Dreams. Has
I remember talking about
Jennifer
that.
Rubin from A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 stars in this, and Richard Lynch, really notable character actor that Rob Zombie's used, I think in one of the Halloween remakes even. He plays a Freddy Krueger, a kind of adjacent character that is a burned cult leader that kind of haunts this female protagonist's dreams. Of course, it was meant to sort of appeal to that Nightmare on Elm Street audience, but if you really look at that movie, which has sort of been unfairly sort of pushed out into the dustbin of the late 80s, of genre films of the late 80s, it's actually a really good movie with really good performances. And one more, how about, well, of course, we had Halloween 4, can't miss that one. How about, let's hit one more, oh, God, I've got one. Well, first off, again, you can't have a year of the 80s without a Wes Craven film. We've been covering all through the 80s. Yeah. And this year you had The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Wow.
On my 13th birthday, 1988, I'll never forget it, my mother said, what do you want to do for your birthday? I said, I want to spend the day at the movie theater. And so she gave me and a couple of my friends the money to go and see 2 movies. And it was so exciting to see one movie and then go see another. That night, we watched Serpent in the Rainbow at 7, and then at 9, we saw Return of the Living Dead Part 2.
Wow.
One of the happiest nights, one of the greatest birthdays of my life to this day. And finally, I got one more for you. Again, I mentioned John Carl Buechler's incredible magnum opus, as I called it, monster movie from the late 80s, from this very year, actually, Cellar Dweller. I've got another one of the greatest monster movies, not just of the 80s, but really of all time. How about Pumpkinhead?
Oh, wow. That was 88?
1988. Stan Winston directed, and he also, much like John Carl Buechler in Friday 7 and Cellar Dweller, Winston both directed and created what I still think is one of the most realistic, scariest, most creatively designed monsters of all time. In that moment in Pumpkinhead, when the Pumpkinhead creature suddenly is wearing Lance Henriksen's face, and it's like Stan Winston designed the head to have a facsimile of, oh my God. It still creeps me the F out.
Think about all the movies where Lance's face has been recreated.
It really though, right? You're absolutely right. Oh my God. Any others really quick? Let's see. Do I have one really quick? One more. Let's see. Here's a good one. Ken Russell, one of the most controversial directors of the 70s. He released a film that I remember renting at the video store a lot during that period, or maybe in the early 90s, because I just thought it had an interesting cover and there was nudity in it. So I would rent it under the auspices of it being a horror movie just because it had nudity. The Lair of the White Worm, which I think was like the first of all of Hugh Grant's performances. He has a small part in it. And it's a strange, culty film that is about a giant white cult worm, or cult worship of a giant white worm, and vampires, and it's typical insane if you've ever seen Ken Russell's film The Devils, then you know the type of insanity he brings to the screen. He also made the greatest King Arthur movie of all time, Excalibur.
Oh yeah, God.
So
Great
he
movie.
makes very eccentric, interesting, unique films.
That was beautifully shot.
Lair of the White Worm, if you haven't seen it, You should check it out.
Another huge movie from this year that I don't know how we glanced past it, but Beetlejuice.
Wait a minute. Beetlejuice was 1988. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at over here. Yep, Beetlejuice.
Oh my God.
Yep.
That's
Which,
that's a banger.
fast
all-timer.
forward to they were still making them.
I love. Did you by any chance see the Beetlejuice sequel?
Yeah, I did.
What did you think?
Meh.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I thought that Michael Keaton was so dialed in.
He is perfectly capable of portraying Beetlejuice still. The movie, I don't know.
I just thought it was as limp as can be.
And there was a little factor of, I just I don't know, I don't care. I love the first movie, and it would have been cool to see more, I think, at the time. But it just doesn't, I don't know why we're, there again. And it just doesn't.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know.
I will say, though, that Richard Harris musical number that's like fully choreographed around the middle of the film, that Beetlejuice sort of sings this big song, I thought that was show-stopping.
Oh, there's moments, and again,
a lot of great moments,
Michael
a lot of great
Keaton
laughs.
is great. He is great. At times, you've got some great Tim Burton stuff
Yeah.
going on, but
Just
it's
not enough.
Just not enough, and a few too many
storylines.
like left turns,
Yes.
and even too many more modern film ideas that just sort of bring you out of, I don't know, the world they kind of already established
The
in the original.
1988
but whatever.
original has this elegant simplicity to it that works like gangbusters on an
Yeah.
audience,
Yeah.
because Tim Burton at that time understood that the movie was so categorically almost impossible to describe to an audience that you almost had to limit the story of that the movie takes place within, in order not to become just completely convoluted in the strange mythology and ideas that Tim Burton was throwing at like the kitchen sink.
I'm very disappointed with the backstory for
Yeah,
Beetlejuice.
I agree too.
And some things just left. You should leave sort of untold, I think. But anyway.
Yeah, I know all. We've got people
we'll
literally
get to the
from
movie.
every single corner of this beautiful planet waiting patiently to dive in and watch Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, along with Joe and myself. But before we do that, I just want to take a very quick yet very sincere moment to express to you, as we always do at this point in the episodes, how much we love, appreciate, respect, and adore you. Am I right?
100%.
I just want to say, just this month, we received a comment, or I should say I received a comment that was definitely a constructive criticism. And I always think to myself, if one person is saying something, then probably 100 people are thinking it. And
Which one?
This very astute listener brought up was that I have a very bad habit of interrupting you when you're in midstream of your thoughts, and and it is a disrespect, and it is also distracting to listeners, and makes things uncomfortable to listen to for some listeners. Look, when you guys bring forth your constructive criticisms, and we always ask you guys to do that in the comment section for this specific reason, because that's how you wake me the F up. So I realize this about myself, so maybe I can police myself going forward and try to do a more respectful job. So I just want to say, while we're in our little tiny window of sincerity here for our episode, I just want to say to you, Joe, I really apologize if I've done that in the past. And I also want to say to all of our listeners, if I've annoyed you with my yapping and my interrupting Joe rudely, I just want to also literally, honestly, and I'm not making a joke out of this, I'm dead serious. I want to apologize to you guys for that. Anything I'm doing that would deter from the enjoyment of the episode is completely anathema to my mindset in terms of creating these episodes along with Joe. Anything that's going to upset or bother you guys, I want to try to fix immediately. So to that listener, I just want to say thank you so much for pointing that out and I hope I do better in the future. And Joe, I apologize to
No,
you.
well, thank you. But I wasn't, that was an older episode. I do feel like you don't do it that much. But you also, I think people have to remember, is there's this thing when we record of like keeping up with the movies, trying to get things out quickly before certain things go by. And there's definitely like a sort of a rhythm to us kind of going back and forth and back and forth. And it just happens. Sometimes we got to cut each other off just to get something in before, a scene goes by. But hey, thank you. Yes, we always do listen to what everyone says, and
I only bring it up because I really want to illustrate, if you guys out there at any point notice anything that could make your experience of listening or watching Haddonfield Radio better for you, if there's something Joe and I could be doing better, please let us know. Don't be afraid to criticize constructively, because it actually helps us. I know I might eat my words here, but I have to say, I think I might appreciate the criticism comments even more than the complimentary ones, because I've always known throughout my creative journey in life that you learn so much more from your mistakes than your successes. And that's something I really want to fix going forward, and I hope I do better, because I don't ever want to detract from even one person's experience of taking in these episodes. And that's because Joe and I, we really, really respect you guys, love you guys, and quite literally, as we've mentioned before, the only reason we do this, literally, beyond the fact that we enjoy these movies and love these movies our whole lives, and also love creating content, beyond that, we do this solely to both entertain and comfort you guys with this really fun, hopefully really fun material, talking about movies all of us love so passionately. And maybe sometimes when I'm yapping 100 miles an hour, it's really just a sort of a symptom of that passion.
Yeah, we have so much info we're trying to.
And
to
Joe
get
and
out,
I have been. I just did it again. I literally did it again. Joe and I.
I'm taking the horn from now on. I'm gonna. I reserve
did
the
it
right
again.
to keep talking. Hello.
I went a whole 3 seconds.
You had to give it a
Before
shot. I
screwing
give you
up.
credit for trying.
No, you know what it is, and then I'll shut up.
No.
Joe and I have to remember, maybe some of you guys out there don't know this, Joe and I have been creating creative projects together now for over 30 years. We've been best friends for that amount of time as well. And so Joe and I just have this natural sort of rhythm to our conversations. And frankly, if you were to hear us talking before we were recording, it sounds exactly like it does when we're recording.
It does.
We don't put on any airs at all, I promise you.
We'll start almost doing the commentary before we're recording, and we have to like tell
Joe,
ourselves.
we have to shut
stop.
ourselves
We have to
up.
like stop. We got to save this because we talk about the movies. We just instantly go into it when we see each other. But anyway.
Also, I just want to send a quick shout out to a couple quick people.
Yeah.
Brian Riley. He's a listener, a faithful listener of ours. He sent me a couple of really, really, really kindly worded messages on the Haddonfield Radio Instagram page this month.
Mm-hmm.
And he's someone who's been listening to all the episodes and is really passionate about this show. And I just wanted to shout you out and just tell you, Joe and I, we love you, and we sincerely appreciate hearing from you. And we sincerely appreciate your support of Haddonfield Radio. That means the world to us. And also, guys, Davy Deathray. If you don't know who Davy Deathray is, and a lot of horror fans already know who Davy Deathray is, if you go look him up on Instagram, if you're one of the few who don't or haven't been exposed to his work, he does these incredible sort of like out of theater reviews of really all the current horror films and horror culture going on his Instagram page. I find Davy's Instagram page to be one of the most entertaining horror Instagram pages out there. And he is a real extremely kind supporter of this show. And so I just wanted to say hello to him and tell you we love you and we sincerely appreciate you. And just because I've only mentioned a couple people, I really am speaking to all of you. If you're at work right now, passing the time listening to us talk about and yap about Friday the 13th Part 7, we love you. If you're driving around as a Lyft driver, an Uber driver, or an Uber Eats driver, or working in an Amazon delivery, we love you. If you're out with one earbud in walking your dog like I do when I listen to podcasts, we love you. Whatever you're doing, if you are listening to our voices in order to fall asleep at night,
Hey, whatever floats your boat.
we love you.
I want to say thank you, speaking on that note, to a buddy of mine, Brian Crosby, who's been checking out our episodes. I know him from my Star Wars cosplaying world, and he found out, we realized we both like horror, and he's one of the guys who listens, he works overnight. And
We have a bunch of great, really
and
wonderful overnight workers who listen to our episodes.
So I'm
pass
sure
the
if
time.
it's like 3 or 4 in the morning or something right now for you, Brian, so enjoy the episode, and
we love you.
Don't fall asleep at work.
There
May
you
the
go.
13th be with you.
I love that. I just love that. I love everything about that. And I love everything about you guys, and I know Joe does too.
And if you're listening to us on the premiere of this episode, it is Friday the 13th, so happy Friday the 13th to everybody.
Our second Friday the 13th that we were lucky enough to kind of fall into in order to for our release schedule.
Yeah.
So always exciting.
Yep.
So I guess, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's it. We should get to the movie.
Let's jump right in. We're going to be watching, of course, John Carl Buechler's 1988 film, Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. I love this film. I enjoy it for all of its little issues here and there and in the horrible treatment it had from the MPAA. I still love this film because
It's fun.
you can see that the people that were working on it and making it were trying their best to create something fresh and unique and fun for the audience that had come to love this series so much.
Mm-hmm.
These guys, they were making these films for their audience, and you've just got to respect that. But before we go, one more quick shout out to one of our all-time favorites, Henry Manfredini. We love you.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, Henry.
And I was never even going to mention it.
No, please do. I got to get names right. Anyway.
Dr. Henry Manfredini, Esquire. Our attorney.
All right. Let's
So yeah,
start
we
the
love you
movie.
guys. We'll see you on the other side of this when the movie starts. Without any further ado, let's jump in and watch The New Blood.
And here we go.
And for the very first time, you're able to see us.
Wow.
You have to look at our ugly mugs through this entire movie. Good luck.
You're going to see me frantically looking through my notes now.
Yeah, I was going to say, now we're exposed, and they'll see how much we rely on our notes with our 50-year-old brains.
The problem is I don't put my notes in a particular order, so you're going to see me doing a lot of where did I put it? Where did I put it? But,
I find it interesting your notes are on paper and mine are digital.
I always prefer doing things like that old school.
I love that. I wish I did too.
Now,
Yes.
what an intro,
I love this.
right? Obviously, fun fact, this is Crazy Ralph from the original movie.
Walt Gorney.
Walt Gorney, and that's him doing the voiceover, getting everybody up to speed. And it's cool that we're getting back to this after we didn't do a recap like this in the last one.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, 'cause it's very Friday the 13th to have these.
I just want to say right from the jump,
Yeah.
I think this is my favorite cold open of the second era of films.
Yeah.
I love the idea of going back and recruiting Walt Gorney again to literally tell this Cassandra-esque story that his character, Crazy Ralph, has been telling since the very beginning of this franchise. It's just a beautiful way to tie this film back to the beginning again.
Yeah. Yeah, we're on film 7, so, chances are maybe there are people who haven't seen every single one.
Yes.
And it sort of sets it up to remind people why he's down at the bottom of the lake, when we start the movie for real. Because up to this point, nothing has been shot by John Carl Buechler.
And the thing is, these cold opens, they really reinforce that episodic structure that Frank Mancuso Sr. Kind of visualized at the very beginning of this series' history.
Yep.
So it works for me. I think this one in particular, they are all good in their own right, all through the sequels, but I love this one.
And having Crazy Ralph is just an extra chef's kiss, as you say.
And it's a chef's kiss to the editing of this cold open, because they really picked the perfect key moments from especially the previous few films to really not only get you up to speed expositionally, but to get you excited for the world you're about to re-enter for now the seventh time.
And the first film in a while, it has no Tommy Jarvis besides the flashback here, but we are now moved on from that storyline.
It theoretically ended the Tommy Jarvis unofficial trilogy in the last episode, Jason Lives.
Now, did you know that the associate producer, is it Barbara Sachs, right? Mm-hmm. I'm always worried I'm going to get it wrong. So she had, before they settled on this idea, an early concept from her was to have, tell me if this doesn't sound familiar from other horror movies. Corporate land developer comes in to cover up the previous Voorhees murders in order to build a bunch of condos around Crystal Lake. And from there...
Wait, that was Barbara Sachs' original idea?
That was, one of the concepts she pitched.
Oh my God, let me just tell you, not only do I've never heard that, and I love this idea.
It's a little poltergeisty though, right?
Oh my God, you're right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It is so poltergeisty.
Right, yeah, and maybe that's why they didn't do it, ultimately.
But listen, what do you think of that idea within the framework of these films? I think it's a very interesting way of sort of bringing the mythology forward again, and I want to tell you a funny personal detail. My own personal, imaginary Friday the 13th, fan film idea, that would have been the plot. I actually kind of like this idea.
You would be radically reestablishing the Jason's hunting grounds. Completely different now around Crystal Lake if you're having condos, lots of people.
Of course.
Developed areas.
And building off of this idea that Jason is sort of the unofficial protector of the Crystal Lake woods.
All while supposedly these developers are trying to erase the fact that those murders happened so that people want to live there. So they're trying to hush it all, and at the same time Jason's probably going around killing people. And
there are so many times in these Friday the 13th episodes we've done that you've brought up these alternate plot
I
ideas,
love the alternate ideas.
Thrown away or plot ideas that end up to me feeling like better ideas than what's utilized. I don't know, maybe a lot of people out there might disagree. I think that's a really cool idea, and you really only hear I have to admit, a lot of objectively negative things, anecdotally, about the, Barbara Sachs working on this set. Yeah. So hearing that is really cool.
Now, what do you think about this Crystal Lake? They filmed in Alabama, and this isn't really a lake at all. It's sort of like a stream that they kind of corralled off to fill an area, I don't know.
Look, we're back. In my opinion, we're back to man-made puddle territory.
Yeah, exactly.
That we saw back in Friday 3. With Steve Miner, and that he has forced to use. Yeah. Really quick, am I wrong? I said this to Joe before we started recording.
Yeah.
This girl looks so spookily like Heather O'Rourke again from Poltergeist. Yes. Another Poltergeist reference.
This whole scene, it's contrived. It's the stereotypical alcoholic, abusive dad. There's nothing interesting with what they're doing here. But the weirdest thing to me is they set this guy up to be this awful father, yet the rest of the movie, when she's grown up and the mom, they're all talking about the dad, it was I know, I miss him too. He was this,
Right.
And it's
it's basically just lazy screenwriting.
It's weird. I don't know.
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to what you mentioned about the look of this film.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention the production designer of this film is named Richard Lawrence.
Yeah.
And I want to say, all through these sequels, one thing I've noticed, at least from my opinion and my perspective, I think these departments have always done a great job of creating this sort of unified stylistic vision for what Crystal Lake and the adjacent areas are supposed to look like. And for the very most part, I think most of these sequels do a pretty serviceable job of doing that. What do you think?
Yes, I truly wish, though, that there was a little consistency. They filmed in the same place for a few movies or something, because it does look different. But they're kind of establishing that area of the lake that seems to have houses close by one another, kind of like what we saw in part 4. And in fact, later they will go and film interiors in the house from part 4. The movie, although it was shot in Alabama here for the exteriors, these houses were built strictly for the movie.
And that's interesting because to me it really emulates part 4. The structure of the two cabins right next to each other with these two kind of parallel character groups in their storylines within the two houses. And also I notice, I think a lot of the kind of production design, as I was mentioning a few minutes ago in part 7, to me really feels like the final chapter to me in a lot of ways. It feels kind of stylistically connected back to that sequel.
You're right. Yes. It does have a lot of feel from some of the last couple. It's weird that, all these years later, the area has now also gone back to calling itself the Crystal Lake.
It's actually, to me, it's one of those missed opportunities, evolving story-wise, that you could have created something about Forest Green going back to Crystal Lake.
See the tripod? I'm sorry, right there. See how the camera tripod?
Oh, I never noticed
Yeah, it was
that.
sitting right there. Anyway, yes, but how long do you think it's been? How long do you?
I hate these questions. I hate when we get into this.
From when Tina was little and we just saw Jason under there to now.
I would say this would have to be approximately 10 years, 11 or 12 years later. Let's say here she's 16 or 17. And she was,
She's supposed to be, I think, 19.
Oh, 19.
Yeah.
Okay, so if she was 5 or 6 and there, 12.
No, she was probably like 9 or 10.
9 or 10. Okay, yeah, so what do you think?
I think generally, like John Carl Buechler will say a lot of times, 10 years. I've also seen in a couple places 7 years, but I think 10 is probably a little more accurate.
But why does it stand out to you? Like, why were you asking?
Just because if you really think about the way the Friday the 13th timeline is going from the beginning, this should actually be like 1998 or 3 or something. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's weird. It's but then you get when you get to Jason Takes Manhattan. If you want to look at things like movies being advertised in the background, like the original Batman or Tim Burton's Batman,
right?
Then that places that movie firmly around 89. So
wow,
I don't know. It's a mess. It's a messy. My point is, it's a messy timeline, which
has been all of these films. One of the handicaps of really all these sequels, the timelines. When you we've said this before. When you stop to think about them, the House of Cards blows down.
Yes.
But I don't think you're really supposed to. I think you're supposed to just go and flow down the river of these Crystal Lake stories and just take it in and enjoy what's being presented to you and what they know you want as a fan. Am I right?
Right. No. I know. Again, this movie was a victim of a time crunch, so they kind of have to. So I think filming here they always talked about it, like for logistics reasons, they said we had to kind of do it in Alabama. And they were filming also in the winter months. So, when you get outside, you'll see breath sometimes. A lot of these actors talk about freezing, like when the girl gets in the water later, like it is freezing. But the area that they built those houses on, those houses have no interiors, the ones we're seeing around the lake. All these interiors of the house are being shot on a sound stage in California.
Oh,
and if you really look at all the windows and the way you never truly see, it's just light. You start to pick up on the fact that they're in a set in a warehouse.
That's
and they're replicating all the light and everything.
It's like my eyes never even picked up on something like that.
No, of course not. Until you're told no. But so they even filled in all that land that the houses and the cars are parked on. And there's my New England accent for a sec. And so they said, like, while they were filming, things were constantly sinking, and they had to keep filling in more and more dirt to keep the front yard, quote unquote, of the houses together. But
this sequence here where the doctor provokes Tina to ignite the book of matches, and then later one of the crescendo scenes when Jason is fully on fire and she sprays the gasoline all over him. I find it interesting that kind of reminds me of a completely different Stephen King character, which is Firestarter.
Yeah, this movie definitely has a feel of Firestarter, Carrie. Like I was saying to you, I think earlier, the kids in this movie, they feel more like Nightmare on Elm Street kids than Friday the 13th kids to me.
And these elements of the film with Terry Kaiser's character, feel very much almost like Nightmare 3 has some of those thematic elements as well.
And you recognize him, right, from the classic Weekend
I
at
didn't
Bernie's.
until earlier when you brought that up. I knew he looked familiar, but that he is from Weekend at Bernie's totally blew my mind.
And John Carl Buechler talked about, like, he kind of left it up to him to figure out, up to the actor to figure out the intensity. And, like, so Laura Park Lincoln didn't always know how much she was going to get yelled at by this guy and stuff. So he's like really kind of evoking these sort of emotions out of her by getting yelled at. You'll also notice throughout the scenes that Laura Park Lincoln, fun fact, she's wearing a locket for most of the movie. And what she did was right inside of it, all these certain things that she could use that would help her trigger crying.
Oh, wow.
And so that was
really
something she would always like hold on to and
I just wanted to mention
acting.
The whole connection to the Stephen King character, the homage to the character of Carrie White. I find that to be so fundamentally interesting because, to me, it allows this movie actually, in its legacy, to tie back to the original 1980 Friday the 13th film again, considering the stinger ending of that film that Tom Savini conceived of was an homage to what? The ending of the movie Carrie.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was a quite interesting little sync between those two movies in that character in particular.
They also said like they liked Laura Park Lincoln's look because she looked a little bit like Sissy Spacek, and she had that Carrie vibe. And it's funny, you're talking about casting Laura Park Lincoln, and she... actually, the producers didn't go for her, and John Carl Buechler kept getting her to re-audition with something different about her, different color hair, different clothes, and so they didn't even realize they kept seeing this. He kept putting her through basically till they went for it.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
And she's like 26 years old here.
Yeah, well, you can objectively you can see that,
and so is Kevin Blair. The lead that she's always with, and it's weird that they're playing essentially 19-year-olds. They said they couldn't find 19-year-olds that could do all of this believably.
Well, first of all, we're recording this, as you guys know, in 2025, and sadly, Laura Park Lincoln passed away this year. One thing I want to say that really shines through in her performance in this film is her absolute intensity and commitment to the realism of this character. Now, she actually went and sort of shadowed some actual psychics, and really saw a lot of legitimacy in what she was observing and brought a lot of that nuance and realism to this role. Her, like you were mentioning about crying, I was going to say her ability to manifest emotion is, again, very, very intense. And I think she's one of the best actors that's been in any of these Friday the 13th sequels, in my opinion.
Yeah. She went to the psychics. They kind of taught her to not basically do what most movies do with psychic abilities, the
like
shaking
the
and
herky-jerky, overacting.
Exactly, So, and of course, here we go. Some beautiful Jason stuff.
If you actually watch, though, not to interrupt you, just
yeah.
apologize for, Laura Park Lincoln does very consistent physical manifestational movements and ideas every time she's, creating one of these telekinetic moments.
Yeah.
And I love that there's a consistency to it that looks like something that would have stretched all the way back to her childhood. It's very childlike. And so again, it's just this deep level of thinking and in character. One of my favorite shots in the whole movie right there.
Yep, a lot of people say that. I mean, the spine. So it was really important for John Carl Buechler. He said, in all the other movies, Jason there was no damage to him. He's going through all these things and he just kind of gets up and his outfit's
and this
okay.
Is even pre his actual death.
So it was important for him to show all the damage, the decomposing underwater there, and a lot of people assume that those underwater shots was a dummy, until he starts moving and stuff, and it wasn't. Kane Hodder did all of that.
Wait a minute, those shots of Jason
even when he's just motionless, that's God. Kane Hodder under there. He said that was some of the hardest shoots on this movie because of just having to hold your breath for so long. There was a breathing apparatus, but because of the makeup, the Jason stuff, he couldn't get a complete seal. So he was also drinking water a lot of the time too.
Oh,
But it was
yikes.
just like hours and hours and hours of hanging underwater under there, and
Hey, you
in
know
a
how
tank.
we always talk, especially in the last few sequels, you always get these two character archetypes
Yeah.
of the what did we call them in a previous episode? Like the first kills,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
Or like almost like the lead up kills.
Yes.
And that actor there, I think his name
Billy
is
Butler.
Yeah, Billy Butler.
Yeah.
There are two actors, himself and the little girl that plays the young version
Mm-hmm.
of Tina, that actually went on to co-star together in Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3
with Kane.
with Kane.
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is really, really cool.
Yep. And
Which is, I say again, my second favorite Texas Chainsaw movie.
I believe Billy Butler, I mean, he does a lot of stuff in movies, but I think he also did some effects, and that's kind of how we knew John.
He was a very in-demand, supporting actor during that decade.
Yep. And this guy, the main lead, Kevin Blair as Nick Rogers, he always reminds me of to me it's like a Christopher Reeves feel dude, that square jaw and just overall big dude, like naturally just a mountain.
I was saying earlier before we were recording, I think he absolutely is the perfectly cast in his particular character archetype as it has appeared in previous sequels. He looks almost like the other characters he's meant to emulate, like Rob, for example, and others. And he has that perfect kind of all-American sort of, healthily masculine vibe to him without feeling threatening or like sexually overbearing.
Yeah.
There's always that character.
Fun fact, he's now goes
Fun fact.
by Kevin Spertus.
Wait, who does?
Kevin Blair. He's credited as Kevin Blair in this movie.
Okay.
The guy we were just talking about. Now he goes by Kevin Spertus.
Let me look at the spelling.
Spiritus.
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 I wonder what that's all about.
He's a gay man, and I thought maybe that he got married and took the other
maybe.
man's name. I don't know.
As a side note, just
yeah.
because you reminded me of it, in the fandom that exists around Friday Part 7, a lot of fans lovingly and jokingly refer to this film as Friday the 13th Part 7 because a vast amount of the actors involved in this film were essentially either gay or closeted gay.
Yep.
And again, that sort of gives me like Nightmare 2 vibes
Yep.
in a way,
Yep.
in terms of those thematics. But, in the way that particular slasher sequel is associated with LGBTQ culture.
Mm-hmm. And during these scenes, if you really look, because they were on a tight schedule and they couldn't stop at any point to because of weather, it's raining in a lot of these scenes, and they just have covers over them. And if you look through in the background, things are wet and all that stuff. But it kind of changes from shot to shot at times. But if you look, rain kind of comes and goes in a lot of these evening scenes.
Again,
Yeah.
even though we, like you were mentioning, we are filming in a completely different state, in a state that's not even sort of like related to the other states we've filmed in before, a southern state. This looks like New Jersey woods to me. I mean, this looks like Crystal Lake. Does it not to you?
Yeah, the woods are fine. The lake just feels a little like there's not enough depth to it. It's the other shore is too close to me.
It really, again, reminds me of what we see in Friday 3.
Yeah.
That's what I kept thinking.
Yeah. Man, Kane Hodder, again, this is just a great... And you'll notice what they do when they shoot, whenever they're shooting Kane, the camera's low. He looks bigger and imposing.
Yes.
And then when you're at everyone else, you're either level with them or looking down on them. And that shot was requested by Frank Mancuso. They called that their 3D shot for this film. It was like their little homage.
Frank Mancuso wanted suggested that shot. Cool.
Of the tent spike kind of coming right at the camera. So that was their little 3D shot. Fun fact.
It reminds me a lot, of course. Again, thinking of Part 3, it reminds me a lot, of course, of the gun, the spear gun.
Yep. And here we start, getting introduced to all the other quirky characters that are around the sci-fi nerd, who John Carl Buechler says this is basically him.
Wow.
He was the guy writing sci-fi stories, not getting girls, and, this was, him.
It immediately, when I was watching this movie this month, I was reminded of my own teenage years, because I always have worn those pins that he's wearing and have collected those little pins. To this day, I still, everything is covered in those little pins. So I love that. My heart went out to that character.
Every death in this movie takes place at night.
Oh, that's interesting.
I
And I found out
fact.
there are 16 kills in this movie. Mm-hmm. Which is on the higher end, I think, if I can remember correctly.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. No, I mean, that's what's weird. It has so many kills, and they took so many of, the kills out.
Well, the kills themselves were literally killed.
Yeah, exactly.
They killed the frickin' kills. You're absolutely right. So I'll give you a couple names that you might remember. You might have heard in previous Friday episodes of Haddonfield Radio that were involved in this film as well.
What?
Of course, Martin J. Sadoff.
Yes.
He was the 3D effects supervisor in Part 3. Also very much credited with part of the bringing the hockey mask into the Friday franchise.
He was like one of the two crew members that were hockey fans and brought their gear with them to the set.
And insofar as the special effects teams, this movie had a really deep bench of impressive effects talent. A lot of the names of which you might remember from previous films: Joe Carlucci, Jim Doyle, A.J. Workman, who was essentially John Carl Buechler's effects assistant, but he had a lot to do with this incredibly infamous sculpt of Jason's face that you see so famously in Part 7. Also, Martin Becker. Martin Becker was involved in the special effects in the Friday films for numerous films in the past, and up through the next film as well.
That right there, that shot of Jason was Kane Hodder's very first shot he ever shot as Jason.
Oh,
Fun
wow.
fact. Ding, ding. Sorry, continue.
No, that's it.
Okay. Yeah, and so again, if you look around the set and you really pay attention, you can see that they're kind of not in these houses. But they do it well. I feel like you don't notice unless it's pointed out
Yeah,
to you.
you're absolutely right.
And I guess, even though it didn't make it to the final cut, it was shot where you see the doctor pull that spike out of the house, so but then they decided to leave it a little bit more of a mystery, the red herring, type of a thing, is because could it be him as the killer? It leaves that question longer in your mind.
I'll admit, I hadn't watched Friday Part 7 in the preceding many years up until getting ready for this episode. And so some of the plot elements were were almost like new to me again.
Yeah.
Because I was catching back up with this film. And one of the things I think, sort of like anticipating that was going to happen is sort of like a Dr. Sartain situation from the David Gordon Green Halloween films, where Terry Kaiser's doctor, I kept expecting him to somehow want to sort of get up close and personal with Jason in some way.
Yeah. No, he's just morally corrupt.
Yeah,
that's
right.
all.
I think something triggered.
Yeah,
I think
of course,
Dr. Sartain of it all sort of triggered that in my mind.
Definitely.
He sort of reminds me of Sartain.
And that's why they took out the part where you see him pull that spike out, because it leaves the question in your mind longer. Is he up to any of this killing? You know what I mean?
Wow, you're absolutely right. That's really interesting.
Because you kind of probably think it's him, but you don't know for sure. And we were talking about Kevin Blair a few minutes ago, and he and Lar Park Lincoln, even though they were trying to be boyfriend and girlfriend, quote unquote, in this movie, they had a hard time working together. They didn't jive. Now they're friends, from the convention, or they were when she was alive, from the convention circuit. They kind of, made up over the years. But when they were filming this, they actually did not get along at all.
Wow.
And another fun fact with this scene, if you pay attention to the shape of the tent, the pointy, angular tent here. Well, in a couple minutes, I'm going to point something out.
Oh my God, I can't wait. I have no idea where you're going with this.
And just remember that shape. The hockey mask in this one was made from the same mold that the Part 3 mask was made from. And so it has the same sort of hockey, the axe slit and all that, but they did shave down the overall size because Kane Hodder's. They wanted to see a little bit more of the Jason.
Yeah, and you
kind
definitely
of sticking
do.
out around. And I think
Right.
Kane Hodder is a kind of a naturally smaller head. You know,
But that aspect of the Part 7 mask, I think, is actually very successful. Where it like you said, it's sort of almost like shrunk wrapped a little
well,
bit.
it's like
Shrink-wrapped.
it's like under the water, all his flesh
Yes, like
has puffy,
swelled up.
Yes, exactly.
I love the way that John Buechler, very much like Tom Savini before him, thinks in these incredibly realistic terms when he's creating and designing his practical makeup effects appliances. And again, it's why it's again so heartbreaking that Jack Valenti in the MP8AA didn't understand that artistry.
You gotta go. I'm telling you, you gotta either go online or get the box set where you can see all these deaths extended, because they're so gnarly, all of them. Oh, look at the tent. It's now a dome.
Oh my God, you're right. And again, I would not have noticed
I know
that.
you don't until, and look how wet it is. All of a sudden, it's raining. Again, they couldn't stop because of rain.
Wow.
Because of the tight schedule, so that's where the rain kind of comes and goes.
Have I mentioned to all of you guys listening, no matter where you are, that Joe and I love you? Just checking. John Carl Buechler was actually inspired by this 1971 film I've never seen called Hands of the Ripper. And apparently it was a British horror film about Jack the Ripper's daughter. And he feels he brought a lot of ideas to Lar Park Lincoln that were directly borrowed or riffed off of that film. I wonder if any of you guys out there have ever seen that movie.
Well, we got to talk about this really quick. This is
So
Kane
iconic.
Hodder's
So
favorite
iconic.
death. But it's odd. It's interesting to point out that originally the way it was scripted and filmed was that he hits the tree over and over and over again. They had like a sack of blood in there and these little spikes in the tree, so that every time he would do it, it would puncture,
It would tear at
puncture
the bag,
and more
right.
blood. And it was so between the latex gloves he was wearing and just the weight of all the blood in the side of the bag, like it was very hard for Kane Hodder to do that scene. And it's when you look at it in the deleted scenes, they have the whole thing, and it's like Jason he almost gets tired at and you pick up on that from Kane Hodder. So. At the end of the day, they cut it to that one hit, and it's like one of the few times where maybe like the edit is
Where, like,
actually
less
better.
is more?
Yeah, they all
Absolutely
agree that
agree.
it was like this. That was the way to do it, and
Well, when
it's
you
just
do- when
it's a great death.
When the sleeping bag slams against the tree once, what it tells you is, look at Jason's
Right,
superhuman
exactly.
strength. If he has to do it 5 times and he ends up winded,
Yeah.
he loses some of his mystique.
And there's a beautiful callback to it when we get to Jason X, which I love. It's very clever.
Yes, I love that too.
yeah.
We'll get there.
So did you see his breath coming out? So, another fun fact, it was winter, and this is alligator country. So they actually had to hire this alligator wrangler to hang out with a gun and be ready to shoot any alligators.
Oh, that's right, because they're down south.
But the thing was, it's winter, and alligators aren't active in the winter. So the guy kept saying like he got paid to just sort of sit around.
Oh, that's so
I
funny.
want to point out that alligators not being active is not the same as not being there. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Like if you
they're
to
still in
step
the
on
water.
an alligator, he's going to bite you.
I don't know, but I'm just saying they're not gone. They're just
It's
asleep.
not like the alligator's going to say, "Don't worry, everyone.
Yeah.
It's off season."
I don't know.
It's
So-
off. I'm not hungry.
that was a
I've eaten.
I'm sure the producers were just trying to be extra safe just in case, but still, no thanks, not for me.
That's too funny, man.
Yeah, no. And let's take a minute and talk about the music.
Yes.
It is a combination of music that had already been recorded by Harry Manfredini.
Don't even tell me you were about to say it
I
again.
really was. Okay.
I have to admit, I think Henry Manfredini actually has a better ring to it.
And then they brought in
I do.
Fred Mullen, who had been scoring the TV show, to sort of add new stuff. And he sort of added his own stuff, but there's also certain times where they literally meld his stuff and Harry's stuff, together. And, it's weird. I kept trying to look up and find more information about why did Harry not do the film. And I think it was as simple as it just kept coming up that, he was unavailable. I think the shooting schedule didn't allow them to wait for him, and he was already scoring Deep Star 6 for Sean Cunningham.
That our old friend Larry and I, we used to call it Deep Star Sucks. That's
Right.
what we used to call it.
And so I don't know if there was any more soap opera-ness to it than that. It's interesting that he doesn't do part 8 though. I don't know if they were kind of wanted to say that Fred, so if you helped us out with
Whoa. Wait, Harry Manfredini does not do the music for
No,
part 8?
they keep Fred Mullen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Like, he's not credited even as, probably just
No,
as
they
themes?
switched completely to Fred for the next one.
Well, like I said earlier, when I was watching this and I was really listening for where you can distinctly hear the difference in the scores,
Yeah.
or the artist creating the music,
Yeah.
I like a lot of what Fred Mullen was doing in
Well,
this
he's got his
movie.
own flavor,
Yeah, I like
and
it.
he purposely did it to not sort of step on Harry's toes, And so, in this movie, a lot of the times when you are hearing the "kick mama," it's John Carl Buechler, and it's almost used in this film like a sound effect more than something in the music. You know what I mean?
Oh,
And I
wow.
swear he's not saying.
I know. It's one.
I think he's actually doing what we all think, or something. But it's a little different. You'll notice it's not used quite the
I
same
know.
way.
I will die on that hill that I have never once in my life heard the sounds kick, ma, ma, ma. I don't hear those sounds
I know.
anywhere in
you
any
don't.
of these mixes of any of these films.
Yeah.
I specifically hear something like cha, 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 ha, ha, ha. Right?
Right. I know a lot of
Not
people
just
do.
me. Maybe my ears don't work.
I hear it now that Harry/Henry always says it, that's what it is. I can hear it. It's affected, obviously, but...
And I know that even broaching that subject irritates a lot of the fans of the music of these films, and rightly so, because a lot of fans distinctly do hear, kick, ma, ma, ma.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not one of those fans. I do not hear that.
Now, what do you think about the idea that they have now in the Friday the 13th universe introduced people with psychic abilities?
I love it.
It sort of broadens the idea of what Jason might ever be able to encounter now, right?
Yep.
We've sort of changed the rules. Yes, there have been supernatural aspects to Jason, but now we realize he's not unique in a way.
I love the way you just put that.
Right.
That's exactly right. You just hit the nail right on the head.
Which is kind of why I think you sense from Jason his confusion. Like when she psychically rips the mask off. He's angry, but he's also like, what was that?
Oh, you
know?
can clear when we
Like,
get there. We'll talk about it.
you know?
Jason is completely shocked.
Yes,
when that
yeah.
mask is ripped off his face.
Yeah.
It actually, if you think about it, it really is sort of the ultimate insult you can pay to Jason. It's the ultimate
Yeah,
slap in
exactly.
the face you can give
Exactly,
Jason.
yep.
Like I always think about that anecdote of like the African children that have to sneak up on a lion and slap it in order to enter manhood.
Yeah.
And this idea like knocking the mask off Jason's face.
Yeah, you didn't hurt him, but you knocked his freaking mask off.
But Jason, you're absolutely right. If you literally look at what Kane Hodder does performance-wise, it is a look of shock. He's shocked.
Yep.
And he doesn't understand what's happening either. And I think that's why it works for me so well as a plot element.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I'm somebody who I'll take anything I can get when it comes to growing the lore or growing the mythology of both Crystal Lake and the characters within these movies. I love any sort of evolutions of mythology, and this is a really, really, really good one.
Yeah. No, definitely.
It's too bad they didn't, again, maybe build on more supernatural ideas. I guess they do, actually, in part... you know what? I guess they do. Like, look at Part 9. Part 9 is entirely a supernatural movie.
Well, we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. But
so-
objectively, it is a very supernaturally themed film.
Originally, so when they finished this movie, they did ask Lar Park Lincoln to come reprise her role for Part 8. But they had no script. And she didn't want to agree and then find out, A, that they were just going to kill her off in 2 minutes, or B, that
Which
she'd
has
end
happened
up
before.
agreeing to do something and then they'd ask her to be nude,
Yep.
or say, you
It's
said
a-
yes.
it's a smart
and
move.
so that was a decision she distinctly made, was like, Tina's not showing skin.
The minute, I think if you had sexualized this character at all, she will lose a lot of her agency.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally.
And there's plenty of other characters within the milieu of this story in this film that you can fully sexualize
like right here.
for that titillation value
And-
that audiences have come to expect from these films, and it is something that arguably should probably be delivered to them.
And it doesn't maybe get all the way to a sexual point, but she is like trying to, court the guy she has met next door. She does have a sexual side to her, obviously, but we just don't have to go to that place in this movie.
And there's an innocence to it as well. A lot of the libidinous aspects that are traditional for the Friday the 13th films and are really part of the genetic makeup of this series are kind of deployed through a lot of these supporting characters. But that's something you see in all the films going back to the beginning. It's part of like just the structure of these films.
This scene, this actress or this character gets portrayed by like 4 or 5 different women by the end of it, between who's underwater, that girl. They said the water was so cold that what they did is they set up like 4 cameras with all the different shots they needed, wide, tight, and all that. So she only had to go do it once.
Oh, that's such a smart idea.
She wasn't in the water for more than like a minute. And then they took her right to a nurse to get checked out because it was like that cold.
I just want to say that is my favorite kill in Part 7.
Oh, you should see the deleted version.
Fans call the golf swing.
Yep.
There's something in the speed of the delivery and the knock of the head back that to me looks very realistic even within the edit.
I believe that when the body we see from that shot from her perspective on the shore is not the same actor who was just playing the character for most of the movie and up to getting hit. When it's just the body laying there, I think it's that Billy... No, it's the producer. I think Lane... There's Lane Patterson.
Ian Patterson.
Ian Patterson.
Okay, wait a minute. I had him in my notes. Now, he is listed as a producer.
Yeah.
And again, what was his job, essentially, on the set? Do you have
He
an
was
idea?
like one of the main producers.
Okay, all right.
Basically a money guy.
Well, because he's credited in a lot of his IMDb other projects as either an assistant director or a second unit director.
Yeah, so he probably did be like, again, because of the hectic production schedule of this movie, he probably was taking off the other units and shooting the like hand close-ups and all the little stuff, but it was but the associate producer Barbara there, she was more hands-on and making actual decisions about, yes, Jason can do this.
She was performing like the job or the position Don Barnes probably did in the last film.
Yes, exactly.
Like the day-to-day management or micromanagement of all everything going on the set, making sure nobody's overspending, nobody's under over schedule.
Yep.
All the stuff that the creative people can't stand.
And also just story ideas, when we see John or we see Jason later unmasked, like we were just talking about, John Carl Buechler almost had to shoot that in secret because she did not think Jason should be seen unmasked that much.
Oh my
but he
God.
went and shot it anyway when she wasn't paying attention.
Real quick, this actor here, she actually after this film apparently changed her name and completely took on a brand new identity to escape any sort of connection to the limelight at all.
Yeah.
And decided, I guess, no longer to perform anything within the entertainment industry.
Yeah, in fact, I think in the Crystal Lake Memories documentary, they wrongly say that she had passed away.
That's right.
Yeah.
I heard that.
And then they found out that nope, and she's just trying to live a quiet life.
So in the documentary Crystal Lake Memories, it says she passed away?
Yeah.
Oh my
Other
God.
people figured out afterwards, probably because of that documentary, it got back to her, and she just basically said, no, I'm living I'm living a quiet life. I don't want to be known.
That's interesting.
I'm alive, but thank you, and good night.
Wow.
Yeah. So...
That's why you can't trust everything you research on the internet. Because
No,
people
no,
probably
of course
putting together
not,
the
yeah.
script for that documentary probably found that little nugget of information on a Reddit post somewhere and ran with it. I'm just speculating.
Fun fact, the working title of this movie was Birthday Bash. Obviously, they're all there for a birthday.
Oh.
Now, but this is not carrying on the tradition of using the David Bowie songs.
That's right.
Along
with that fun fact, I've got one for you.
Yeah.
Daryl Haney's when he first turned in his first draft of the script, his title that he had come up with was Friday the 13th Part 7, Jason's Destroyer.
Yeah.
Now, I prefer the New Blood, but I'm not against Jason's Destroyer. I kind of think that's sort of cool in its own way. What do you think?
It is. It again is trying to, I think, imply, though, that
someone could destroy Jason.
or does in this movie. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the
and
end,
they had just brought him back.
Yeah,
and they probably don't want to now imply in the marketing that we're going to bury him again.
Yeah. Well, when we get closer to the end, we can talk about the differences. There's a few different endings, and again, that was a sort of fight between John Carl Buechler and Barbara, and I think even Mancuso to a degree. And this actress is Susan Blue, or Sue Blue, they call her. She is a famous voiceover actress from almost every cartoon we ever watched when we were kids.
Oh, yeah. And there's another actor in this film that is the voice, actually, another voiceover, and he's the voice of Johnny Bravo, the cartoon
Oh, really?
character.
I missed that one.
Yes. I'm trying to think of who it is. You guys in the comments section, which one of the supporting actors voiced Johnny Bravo? Let us know in the comment section, and let us know where in the world you're listening to this. We love to know.
I'm not used to being on camera. I keep realizing I'm leaning.
I keep forgetting we're on camera.
I keep looking over. I'm like halfway out of the picture. No. Yeah. I want to say though, what's his name? Terry Kaiser. He's a good actor, like for
Really
this type
good
of a
actor.
movie. He has this intensity, but it's just a perfect amount of over the top. Over the top is sort of a theme of this movie. John Carl Buechler, when you hear him talk about everything is, I wanted this to be over the top. Everything is to be over the top. It was not in any intentions from him for it to be any sort of a believable or sort of like more real world type movie. Now I find it interesting when they were sort of in pre-production that, again, associate producer Barbara Sachs, she was talking about she wanted her Friday the 13th to be respectable. She wanted it to win an Academy Award.
Now, I have heard that anecdote a couple different places.
Okay.
But
She wanted
I almost
Fellini.
cannot...
She tried to get Fellini to direct this movie. So
that can't be a real fun
I swear
fact.
to God. But so to me it's so interesting.
You know what? That fun fact is getting a special event. You're telling me that Barbara Sachs thought she could get Federico
I don't know
Fellini.
if she thought she could get him, but that's what she wanted.
That is the fun fact of the episode.
They were trying to do high-tier directors. So it's interesting that they start there, but end up...
How do you even start at Fellini?
And end up at Buechler. But you know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to diss Buechler, but it's a very different level of director.
Right.
So at some point, they just kind of, I don't know, just gave up on that higher tier thing. Or maybe that was more when they were thinking Freddy versus Jason. I don't know. But...
going back to what you were saying about... the sort of over-the-top tone.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention when you were talking about that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that was done by Buechler in the strategic pursuit of somehow obfuscating the MPAA. That he
Exactly,
felt,
yeah.
if he just somehow played with the tonality of the film, that he might be able to slip some of it through almost comedically and preserve the nature of his effects, his practical effects, and the work his teams were doing. Mm-hmm. So it's actually kind of a smart move that he did.
It didn't work, I mean, with the MPAA, but that was his intention, And, I think I had mentioned it in the last episode, but the actress Carrie Noonan, who was in the last movie, she was auditioning for a movie called Birthday Bash. And it was like during the auditions and when she got the script, she realized, like, this is Friday the 13th, isn't it?
Oh, God.
And she had to tell them, like, I was already in the last one and you killed me.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. All right, so now this is really cool. So this vision, or what John Carl Buechler wanted to do there, was instead of seeing Jason and Tina's mom, you were going to see little kid from the lake Jason holding Pamela Voorhees' severed head saying, "Kill her, mommy, kill her."
Well, again, why didn't they frickin' do that?
Barbara Sachs.
That's the frickin' best idea.
She thought it was over the top too much,
Well, it is kind of interesting to me off the top of my head that one more film down the line in part 8, you do see child Jason again. Not, of course, nothing
Not- yeah,
like the
yeah.
Tom Savini design of that version of the character, but you do return to that childhood idea of Jason
Mm-hmm.
in one of Part 8's, what I think is one of its movie's most uncanny and creepy moments, when that little boy Jason talks in that kid voice.
It used to freak me out when I was a kid.
so
And I'd see it
weird.
on cable. It's just like
It's very odd.
Yeah.
It's creepy.
Yep.
It works really well. We'll get there. We'll get there next month.
And like this whole scene, like this character had a whole different death originally, and you can see it in the
so
deleted
talk about
scenes.
that, because I don't really remember much of the details.
Originally, she like bumps into the two stoners in like a shack, and you know they end up leaving, and they leave her with a joint, and she's in there smoking, and then Jason gets her, and John Carl Buechler had it shot, so it was like, you know, in a minute or two, we'll see a little bit of like these overhead shots of, you know, and so originally though, in her original death, you saw everything sort of from that perspective, so you could kind of see him stalking her the whole time on the other side of walls and whatnot, and then he rips her the shreds and
Ooh, again,
you
that
know,
sounds like a banger.
Barbara
Of a kill?
Sachs again thought they needed to sort of expand this character, give her more time and
yes.
make her a little more sympathetic or something like that. And so they came up with this earring thing. And
This is also one. Is this not one of those scenes from Friday movies that we've seen time and time again that clearly is also meant to sort of stretch out and pad the time a little bit?
Of course.
Whenever in a Friday the 13th movie, you always have that scene where somebody slowly, a supporting character slowly wanders around for 3 or 4 minutes until finally they get killed. And when you look at how these movies work, and you have a kill like every 6 or 7 minutes, it clearly becomes something that is padding out time and stretching out tension in a way. But more than stretching out tension, it's really just padding out runtime.
I love that little shot of Jason creeping around the tree, like, ha ha ha, you see what I did? Like, you know, I rigged all those bodies to fall.
Yeah.
And there's the classic slasher movie, you know, bodies propped up by the killer at some point.
The old Michael Myers.
Have these dramatic, you know. So you'll see in this version of The Shack, this type of shot. Like, originally, it was a different kill, and everything was sort of from up there. So you could see sort of like, you know, like a rat in a maze almost type of a feel.
Ooh, I like that.
And you could see both of them doing, I don't know, stalking each other and evading each other and whatnot.
It's funny because in a 2025 sense, there is a scene in John Wick 4 that's really well known, that's already kind of infamous, that is exactly that. That overhead camera just on the God's eye view, just following characters all kind of around, moving around like mice in a maze. And it's really effective.
A nitpick for this movie, unfortunately, is like you could see it there for a second in the lightning. Again, they're doing that thing with the hockey mask, where the one eye, they put the like black fabric under it, and every once in a while you see it, and you know, But again, you know, I got nitpicking. It's not the end of the world.
No.
You know.
No, but it's something to point out because it's interesting.
Yeah. And, you know, again, I think, at least for this movie, I try to give them benefit of the doubt and say a lot of the times any mistakes, if there's actually like a lot of continuity mistakes in this movie if you were to really follow everything. But again, their production schedule was so crazy, it was just sort of get it and go. No time to fix, really, you know, or do again the right way. If you can kind of work with it, we got to work with it.
You know, going back to earlier in the episode when we were talking about how unbelievable the turnaround on this film was, they did not have any time to do anything other than get everything done day to day and quickly and as efficiently as possible. And that's it.
Remember, like, they're shooting mainly, they have to, at night.
Yeah.
You know, so you don't have a whole day. You have, you know, the few hours, and they... You know, like a lot of directors will point out, like, oh, if you look at this shot, the sun's actually coming up. There's like a lot of that in this, you know, movie as well.
Because, they're running out of actual shooting time.
Yeah, exactly. You know, this guy, I love, you know, when he puts the mom in front of himself.
It's one of my favorite parts.
It's just sort of like,
you know what it is? It's a great character moment.
It is. It's sort of like, wow, they really did it, like made that guy do that, you know, the really shitty douchebaggy thing. I'm swearing a lot in this episode. I'm sorry.
I said earlier, Joe has dropped an F-bomb, now an S-bomb, and a D-bomb, I
we need
guess.
a swear jar.
Hey, it's age restricted.
And I love like the old school 70s van. You know what I find very funny in this scene is if when you get inside the van's decorated with party decorations, and you're like, what? Why is that?
That is
like,
funny.
I don't know if they're just trying to like. It's sort of like a subtle, just maintaining a reminder of why everyone's there, or just the atmosphere that these kids are supposed to be partying. But there's like balloons and streamers and hats, see? And it's like, what?
Yeah, what? Well, I didn't notice that, but you're
I don't
absolutely
know.
right. Like, what?
It's like, why? And like some of it's actually hanging up. It's not all just on the floor like that. And you're like, well, what's
I'm a little lost, but whose van is this supposed to be? One of theirs?
I assume theirs.
Let's say it's his, okay?
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
he's just some Lothario, and this is literally his party van.
Yeah.
And he brings his ladies back to his party van.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that the two black characters, of course, have to be partnered up together.
Well, this is the beginning of the, he's saying the
When things were changing,
stereotypical
yeah, the very
black
beginning.
characters being added.
Yeah.
Like now when they make jokes about that, these are the movies that did it.
That they're referring to. That's
Unfortunately,
exactly well put.
It's just, but I another like. I guess negative thing in my mind is a lot of these secondary kids, actors, characters in this movie are pretty forgettable.
Oh, yeah.
This isn't a strong
100%.
Cast of
Whereas we mentioned in the last episode talking about Jason Lives the exact opposite.
Right, yeah.
And again, that comes from Tom McLaughlin being just a better writer.
Right. Yeah.
And a more creative writer.
That's the problem with the fact that they cut so many of these kills out, which were, this kid coming up. Again, Buechler thought for sure they'd leave it because Jason literally just squishes. They made a fake head that they could squish down to like the size of a walnut, and blood is just spurting out. And he said it was so almost comical. There's no way they're going to cut it, and they did. You know,
all the excised effect sequences that hit the cutting room floor. When you go and you watch what you can see, in potato quality of that, that's my favorite one of all the cut ones.
If you can
Buechler's
get the box
effect is
set,
incredible.
those scenes look the best that you're going to be able to get them.
Absolutely.
But again, back to my point is they cut all the gore, the thing that Buechler is good at. This is his specialty. That's what's strong. And all those magic moments are gone. And unfortunately, the writing of the movie is not strong enough to hold everything else up without those kills, which are a very important part of the Friday the 13th, stew.
Yeah. I think the general rule of thumb always makes sense. That if you really want to make your kills that much more impactful, more so than egregiously violent or realistic effects, you have to have the audience care about the characters. If they even care a little bit, if they're even tied in slightly to the agency or storylines of the characters you're presenting, then the kills will be even more effective.
Yeah.
And in some of the previous Friday films, and certainly some of the Halloween films, Nightmare films that we've talked about, the ones that seem to be more successful are the ones with the better writing and the more cohesive, finished screenplays at the time where they began filming.
Not only did that actress from the last Friday movie audition for this and then realize, oh God, it's Friday. You remember from the very first movie, the girl who didn't reveal her age to the producers, Marta Kober? Remember the young girl?
We talked about that.
She actually auditioned and got the part for one of these kids. And then realized after a while, I think she was just going to try to leave it. Then she finally told them, I was in the original, and they were like, all right, well, we can't use you.
Jesus, this is this is like a phenomenon.
Well, it's kind of what happens when you have to be secret about the movie you're making.
And essentially, a lot of these young actors, arguably, probably just go to auditions after auditions after auditions, and you end up crossing over into things a lot of people you've worked with, projects you've worked with,
It's just amazing how far they can get into the process with these people before anyone's like, oh, you were in the last movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is really weird.
I don't know.
That is very strange. Yeah, you'd think, right?
Right.
Like there's some maybe like supervisor or assistant that we might recognize. And the funny thing is, like I just mentioned earlier, there are so many department heads and employees on that were going from movie to movie.
Yeah.
You'd think they would recognize this.
Yeah. Is this leading up to? Yeah.
I just want to say I really respect the fact that in Part 7, Jason just opens the door and walks in.
He still has a Kool-Aid Man.
I know, but
later.
right there, he literally
does.
gently
Yes.
opened the door,
Well,
walked in, and then
in.
closed the door.
He's sneaking in.
I know.
He's leaving mud, though, on the floor.
But I'm just saying, he's evolving. He's
I know.
growing. He's growing as a person. He's much more gentle.
This is about to lead up to like probably one of my favorite, if not favorite, shots in the whole movie when this actor goes downstairs. But there was a famous sort of story from the filming of this movie regarding Kane, where his trailer was like a quarter mile away from the set, where you literally had to just walk down like a dark dirt road, right? And it was like, I think on a golf course or near a golf course or something. So there were like other residents, there were things around, but they all knew that they were filming this movie in the area. But one night, of course, he's walking back to his trailer in full Jason makeup. See this shot, the lightning, Jason in the corner. It's so effing good.
Oh, right.
Ready?
Because look, you don't notice him at first.
Right there. Oh, so good.
One of the best shots in the movie.
So he's walking to his trailer and he encounters this guy. And he's like, the guy's like, are you one of the people making the Friday the 13th movie? And Kane thought it was such a ridiculous comment, considering he's literally head to toe dressed like Jason, that he just sort of like lunged at the guy and growled, and the guy like nearly shit his pants and ran away. He called the sheriff's office.
Oh, Christ.
And then the sheriff like called the producers and said, I'm going to be coming by to talk to you guys about this. Luckily, he never did. But yeah, Kane Hodder scaring regular
Frickin'
people.
mischievous, naughty old Kane Hodder.
That's like a little bit of a Michael Myers kill there. The
Yeah,
old
it really
butcher
is.
knife, right?
It really is.
And
You're
he, you know,
absolutely right. He just grabbed. I wonder what Michael would think of Jason using his signature weapon. You don't see like. Do you ever see Michael with a machete? I can't remember. I'm not
God,
sure
I don't
you
know.
do.
What does he get when he's in the bandages, though, in the garage? Doesn't he have something
Oh
that's
Christ,
not
you're right. I think that might be the machete.
yeah.
I'm going to look up
Anyway.
a picture. We got a frickin' internet right here in my hand. I got the whole world in my hand.
I'm trying to see what else have I missed in this. A really cool thing is that John Carl Buechler, he wanted to do a.
It's just a knife.
Okay. He wanted to do.
A big knife.
Yes. Buechler wanted to do a Friday the 13th, Part 7, Volume 2, where you see Tina gets taken to an asylum afterwards, and Jason kind of follows her there, and sort of, again, now there's mysterious deaths happening around this asylum, and sort of a psychic Jason showdown happens at this hospital,
Oh wow!
Yeah.
And you know what? Where isn't there another asylum?
No, that was like a Halloween thing they wanted to do. I think with Rob Zombie's
Okay.
what was going to be a Part 3 thing,
Yeah. Something was just clicking in my mind about that. That was reminding me of.
Yeah. I love the old school non-CG effects. Everything's wires or shaking or falling or flying that way. And
I was going to say earlier too. I really like a lot of the shots that John Carl Buechler, like the angles he chooses. These high angles. Have you been noticing
yeah,
those?
and Paul Elliott, the cinematographer, he's a lot to do with that.
Yeah,
I
it
do
looks
like
really cool.
It is a shot well. And this scene, fun fact is that they didn't tell him like what was in the presents. Like he's randomly grabbing these presents and kind of reacting to whatever he gets in there, sort of ad-libbing and just going with it. And it's funny.
That's funny.
This is, of course, this is a funny one.
Oh my god!
You know?
And you know what? Now that I'm just thinking of it, screenwriter Daryl Haney really was offended because a lot of those more puerile jokes that you see were not from his screenplay.
Yeah,
and when
well-
he was watching the film, he was extremely irritated because he felt like people are going to think I wrote those dumb, like, childish lines.
Well, like I was saying in the intro, this weird thing happened with his agent where, for whatever reason, his agent calls up Mancuso and tries to demand more money. And they fire him and get somebody else to finish the script. So I think, unfortunately, Darrow's more, he came up with that initial concept of the sort of Carrie versus Jason idea, the psychic. But I think a lot of what's in this movie was not really from him at the end of the day.
That's really interesting.
But I think they couldn't not credit him with
you've
with
got,
that original
you've got
concept.
the Writers Guild they have like rules and laws and bylaws they follow in terms of crediting things appropriately. And
I guess you can just make up somebody named Manuel Fidello and just say he wrote it instead.
I need to look into that name a little more.
Or if anybody else out there knows what the story is really between this man or with the Manuel Fidello.
Yeah, what's the background with Manuel Fidello or Fidelio? If you guys out there know more about that, let us know in the comments section a little bit more of the background.
This girl also had a completely different death that I think mainly got cut because it ended up looking fake at the end of the day. Something about like the torso double shifted when she was supposed to get like sliced in half. So instead they throw her out a window.
Okay.
But she, almost every death, is either expanded or was different, before the MPAA got their hands on it.
I know a lot of you guys listening to this will have already done this, but again, if you guys haven't seen some of these deleted scenes that aren't in the best quality but do exist on this box set, you guys should really check them out just to pay respect to the original ideas. And that way, when you look back and you remember this film after you've seen those scenes, I like to remember the film with those scenes just reinserted.
Yeah.
Because it's just such an affront to John Carl Buechler to damage his artistry like that.
And of course, I think in this day and age, if that footage was still around, we would get nice transfers and looks at them.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, for some reason, Paramount supposedly destroyed it all. Which now what gives me hope is, so again, weirdness with the soundtrack and the two different composers, and I guess for a long time it was very hard for them to ever get the actual soundtrack to be released. It was either just Fred Mullins music, and it was there's copyright things, and I think also they couldn't find the master audio from when they did the film, but eventually they did, and not too long ago they put out the soundtrack for the first time in its complete form with the music cues from both of them. So that was we found the original audio for the movie. I'm hoping maybe someday somebody stumbles upon some dailies or some extra or a copy of the deleted scenes, because you hear about that all the time where film canisters are mislabeled or end up in the wrong movies bins, and there are just storage houses left and right all over the West Coast, just tons of films. All these old films are just sitting in. Just
think of a film like that infamous lost film called London After Midnight.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of people have tried to search for that. It probably exists, like you're saying, in one of these strange, sort of like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
These giant warehouses.
Yeah.
Just
you hear
full
stories
of
about it all
old,
the time.
Film spools.
And, when I was watching this, at first I was kind of like, I'm a little disappointed in Buechler for doing the old cat jumping out and scare,
Yeah.
But what it was, again, Barbara Sachs, that's her cat. She wanted to put it in the movie.
It's weird to think that cat no longer exists.
Well, it ran away. I guess.
Maybe it still exists.
At while they were shooting this, I think she got it back ultimately. But while filming it, it did take off. But I don't know. This Barbara Sachs lady, I don't want to hop on it too much.
Well,
but,
listen, in terms of the legacy of this film, you do hear anecdotally enough a lot of sort of negative accounts of relating to Barbara Sachs.
Can
that doesn't mean anything about her, though. It's just anecdotal.
Yeah. Really quick, though. So the original way that was shot was so much cooler, where you get a sense that she's in the room and she gets a sense that somebody is sort of like looking at her, and the way the camera pans and stuff, it looks like you're seeing the side of her boyfriend's like head, like it's him in the room.
Oh, wow,
And then
yes.
it even comes around and you see the front, and it's not that fake head we saw a second ago. They actually did it with the actor, so it looked
Okay.
like, and then you realize as it kind of pulls away that it's Jason standing there holding the guy's severed head in his hands, and then she realizes it and then screams, but it looks it looked so cool. It was
That
a much
sounds
cooler idea.
so
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah,
I love that.
yeah.
Hey, more evidence you see in this production design of these party implements.
Right, yeah. I mean, they
You never know, like, what little sequences were cut or little scenes.
oh, the
were
whole
cut.
reason they're
Yeah.
there is for a birthday
party,
The-
right.
The
makes sense.
Billy Butler character, he's the one who's supposed to be coming. He's the one that's a surprise party
Right,
for, and he never
gotcha.
makes it.
Yep.
You know? And that's why he's the cousin of the guy of Kevin Blair's character. That's why he's so concerned. He's like the only one in the movie that's trying really to like figure out like where is my cousin? Why are people disappearing?
Where is everybody?
Why is everything weird?
Did
Tina,
everyone
why are
leave?
you freaking out, Tina? What the hell's going on? She's going on about a guy in the lake. You know, it's just
Both of these actors are really good.
Yeah.
They're really good, and they're really good together.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're veteran actors, even
Mm-hmm.
at this point in their careers. She like teaches voice acting and stuff now, and still does, I think, voice acting.
I love this incredibly highly specific weapon Jason's using.
Well, another famous story again. Kane Hodder and John Carl Buechler literally go to like a hardware store in Alabama to go pick out all these weapons
they
for
did?
Jason. Yeah, including the thing we're about to see with the gas-powered round saw blade
Yeah,
thing.
it's almost like a long-arm
extreme
chainsaw
weed
or
whacker, but
yes.
but it's real. Like that was a real thing they just went and bought.
I love that they literally went to a hardware store to look for things to kill people with.
To me, it's
I
also
love it.
funny the idea to see Jason, how he like starts it up and actually primes it. Like to see him think about operating an engine. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Using a piece of machinery that there's that level of sort of thought
Well,
in
listen,
there. You know,
I'm not saying, of course, I'm not suggesting Jason is officially a revenant. But as I mentioned last episode, revenants are basically like the undead or the living dead, but they have thinking minds.
yeah, 'cause they're not quite like the zombies
Like-
that are just like give me
No.
brains. You know,
Clearly, Jason
Yeah.
is still very much mission-oriented.
Yes.
And motivated psychologically almost if he's positioning victims' bodies and things
I mean,
like that.
at this point in the series, he's more or less working on the idea that this is sort of his land, right? These are my grounds, and I'm just going to kill anyone who's around the lake.
Yeah, he's like...
Because he doesn't have a
yeah.
connection. He's just finding these people and killing them, like encountering them naturally almost
He
as
really
he walks
is
around
like-
the woods, you know?
He's like the totemic sort of protector of the Crystal Lake territories. You know, if you come in, like you were saying earlier about this idea of a developer trying to kind of commercialize Crystal
Yeah,
Lake
and
and
hush
bringing
hush
all
the
these
murders,
you
yeah.
know, of course that would go right in the face of Jason's kind of mission. Mm-hmm. Or what he sees as a mission. Which could be related to this Crystal Lake curse and however that motivates things. I mean, it's all really interesting. It gives you a lot to think about and chew on about sort of the mythos that's presented to you in these films.
I wanted to mention too that on the Blu-rays for this, there's audio commentary tracks. One is with Buechler and Hodder, and one's with Buechler, Hodder, and Lincoln. But they're not all three of them are together. That was a weird one. But the one with just Buechler and Hodder, it is so much fun to listen to because Kane Hodder, like he's a talker, right? And he, whenever Jason's scenes are on, he can't help but suddenly start doing almost like dialogue in a funny, shticky way of like he's Jason, you know, and he's like, "Oh, hey, you, come here. What's that? You like this? You like this TV? Bam!
that can't
How do you
be
like
real.
that?" And he's just like,
Oh my God, I
it's
love
so
that.
good. It's so funny. He can't help it every time. He kind of slips into this almost like New Yorky guy that's like, you know, kind of trying to mess with the victims. It's really funny. I definitely, it's worth checking out. It's an entertaining one. They're not very boring at all. I love that. The sound.
I can imagine that commentary between the two of them must be super entertaining.
Because they're old friends.
Yeah.
So, again, one of the things about seeing Kane Hodder in that movie Prison that made him want Hodder to play Jason was there was a scene where Hodder ate live worms.
Wow.
In the role. And again, Buechler was just like, this guy's commitment to doing what will be best for on screen is amazing,
And it's interesting, in my research, looking into the life of Kane Hodder, putting my intro together, you see time and time again, anecdotally and otherwise, his sort of MO in the stunt world was he would do whatever it took to create something, even if it was dangerous, precarious, didn't matter, as long as it was going to look great on screen. Yep. That was his end game.
Even this prop, it's not a prop. Like when he's coming at the camera with that blade, and it's like a foot away. Like that was the real blade. Like they didn't make props for this stuff.
No.
So like everyone, like the camera, they put their trust in Kane to just like not stumble or fall or to be able to see through the mask with one eye.
Wow.
And you know what I mean? And it's dangerous stuff that they're doing. Originally, they're in the real cut. You saw like all his guts start coming out and getting wrapped up in the saw blade and stuff. It was a really cool death.
Wow, that is cool. Isn't it weird, just from a 2025 perspective, just last year, Joe and I go to the movie theater and watch Terrifier 3. Look at what is allowed to be in a movie
of course.
In 2025.
That's what I mean. Like, I feel like if they had access to the footage, they would definitely let us see it now.
It's sort of,
And not that it's not there. They did give us what they had access to.
Yeah.
But it'd be cool to see it in a way where you can almost add it in and it would fit seamlessly.
It's just such a shame they couldn't do you just wish they could do a full restoration. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So many films get that restoration treatment.
Kate? Is that you? Kate? Kate?
And I guess we should mention that, in 2025 that John Carl Buechler, had passed away a number of years ago now, but in the early
sadly.
2000s, yeah.
The horror genre absolutely lost two real legends between John Carl Buechler and Lar Park Lincoln.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, look at that!
This is a great scene, too.
Love that.
This is really, really good. And
again, it's interesting that in this movie, Jason does a lot of behavioral things that he's really never done before.
Yes.
And yet, it completely meshes.
Yeah.
Like, it's not distracting.
I left my notes over there. Hand me my notes really quick.
There we go. There's your
Thank
notes.
you.
Go get those notes.
This is awesome. He's looking at these branches and roots like, what the heck is going on right now?
It actually gave me some Evil Dead vibes
Yeah.
when the tree branches start attacking. And this right there with the wire.
A lot of this is reverse, photography.
Yeah.
All the sparks and stuff are real, but they rotoscoped in the effect of the lightning.
And I love it. I love
Yeah.
that style.
And there's a cool editing thing going on. If you really watch, every time he kind of gets a jolt, there's a cut there. Like the image actually is like jarred right there too. So it's a really cool trick to kind of add that he's sort of getting hit,
It's really too bad that Tina doesn't understand that it was electricity that actually brought Jason back one movie ago. If she only knew that.
Yeah.
That electricity is actually empowering to Jason, and he's essentially playing possum here.
Yeah.
Man, Kane Hodder spent a lot of time in disgusting water.
Yeah, he said that water was actually colder than like when he went into the tank and stuff, you know?
I bet.
Oh, the knees
Look
there,
at the
bones.
kneecaps.
Yeah.
Did you see the kneecaps?
It's really well done. It's good stuff.
Oh my God. It's like a fully detailed Jason Voorhees undead bodysuit.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, just beautiful artistry.
And, since we're getting... Oh, there it is. There's the Kool-Aid Man jump.
Hey, you guys.
And he said like that was one of the stunts where like he barely, if you watch, he's crouched. He has to crouch to clear the window, frame, and he was really close to taking his head out on the top of that window.
Oh, because I think it looks perfect.
Oh yeah, it's great. Because it shows
look
like
at the eye.
lunging almost. Yeah, I know.
Look at the eye.
Yeah.
You see, like, even just with one eye, look at Kane Hodder's acting.
It's a different, yeah. It's yeah. I don't know. It's subtle things, but it's well executed and very
like
palpable.
All this supernatural shit is just really confusing and irritating Jason. Like
Yeah.
he's so confused as to what is going on.
But also, like, think about it. This is the first time somebody is hitting him. Like he's someone's fighting back against Jason. Like, in a big way, not just the one final hit at the end of the movie that takes him down.
Well, remember in the final chapter episode, we talked so much about how the whole movie, that character of Rob is positioned to stand up to Jason, and he's mowed over. So for Jason to see this teenage girl giving him a hard time.
And this is Kane really just letting a roof fall on him here,
It's very Kane Hodder.
I thought it was very funny a minute ago, too, when the tree that inside the house comes flying at Jason with the severed head in it. It looks so funny to me. So it's like Monty Python almost.
Right. Again, it's probably, leaning towards that absurdity that Buechler kept layering into the mise en scène of this film. Now, these two, you were saying they didn't get along?
They didn't get along.
Well, they have good chemistry together as performers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, look at that.
There it is, the hand.
That's amazing. Even the detail on the prosthetic glove, it just looks incredible.
I think it's good that Kane Hodder, is, quote unquote, on the smaller side for Jason, because when you put him in the, all the costume, it doesn't overly bulk him. It makes him the perfect size, He bulks up just enough.
Even though he doesn't have like the inches or the height of some of the other actors that have played Jason before him, I still think he's the most frightening Jason in many ways. And all through his body language. And I also love how from that cracked part of the mask, you're always seeing his jaw kind of grinding.
From when the boat was like hitting him in the last movie.
He's like constantly like grinding at his teeth.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool.
I mean, these were the things that it was important to Buechler to show Jason's damage.
Yep.
And it's great. I love the switch to the chaotic handheld once they're sort of like sparring against each other. It really heightens the frenzied sense,
Who did you say the cinematographer was on
Paul
this?
Elliott.
Yeah, it's really, really good work in this film.
It is good. It's
really
a classic
good
80s
camera work.
sort of feel in terms of its look,
Oh, yeah, this movie, Part 6 and Part 7 and Part 8 really hit that nostalgic sweet spot of that late 80s, early 90s in horror.
Another fun fact was that Laura was in an episode of Freddy's Nightmares, the TV show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, she was in an episode called It's a Miserable Life.
Okay, I'm going to have to look that up.
And that stunt was also one that almost took out Hodder, where, they had fake stairs for him to fall through, and his head was like maybe 2 inches away from hitting the first of the real stairs.
Well, in other interviews, he's actually said that his face actually slammed 2 or 3 steps. And the only thing that prevented him from taking serious injury was that he had that mask on. That he said he felt his face actually go bonk, bonk, bonk.
He has two Kool-Aid Man moments.
Kool-Aid Man moments.
Yeah.
That might be more than any other film. Are there other films with multiple Kool-Aid Man moments?
I don't know. I think maybe.
Got to think about that.
This is a great little
this is it.
sequence.
And Lar Park Lincoln really sells it.
The
Look at
ooze.
that ooze. Oh, it's disgusting.
It's so good.
And now he's like, what?
It's almost like it's literally squeezing the seawater out of, or the lake water out of his skin.
And it's like Jason is almost like offended
Yeah.
that she broke his mask.
Oh, yeah. He's mad. He's kind of like...
He's had this
like,
mask.
you're not supposed to do... That's not... there's rules in war, and you're not supposed to do that.
Wait a minute, was it Shelley's mask?
Originally, yeah.
So he's had this mask all the way since then,
Yeah.
and she just broke it.
Yeah.
Imagine somebody ripping Michael Myers' Shatner mask in half.
Actually destroying it.
Holy Christ, can you imagine? What an affront.
Yeah. So, a lot of these scenes, Kane said, were pretty hard. These particular inside the house here, these stunts were. I mean, he does all this, obviously all his own stunts for Jason, and but this is so good. Right here.
Yeah, I love
again.
this.
The
I love
eye,
this.
the mouth,
Oh my
everything.
God.
It's great makeup.
I really love the teeth and how they're kind of, some of the roots of the teeth are exposed through the
Yeah.
gum. It's just all so well thought out.
That's also very classic Jason, like coming out of the lake, or again the old like jumping up and grabbing somebody and pulling them down.
100%.
I love that too. The mouth there. This is
Yeah.
great. The
That's a very
nails.
Sam Raimi shot.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah. But McLaughlin did that a lot too.
He did.
The quick pushing.
Yeah,
That was
he
a
did.
classic.
Yep.
This is great. Just
She's
Come on.
really pissing him off.
Yep.
And I love it. It's actually funny to me. I think it's really funny.
and of course this becomes the scene that Kane
Oh yeah.
set a record. At the time he had set a record for the
world
longest on
Full
screen
body burn.
full body burn for 44
seconds. And you know what, guys? To some people, that might not sound like a lot, but imagine being completely on fire, your entire body, as we'll see in a moment, for almost a full minute.
And
Which means you can't breathe either.
I was gonna say a lot of stuntmen that did firework like that, they would still rig up a breathing apparatus somehow.
Right.
And he did not want to do that because he thought it looked better. So yeah, he's like holding his breath basically, and just because it looks better.
It's just such a testament to what inspirational boss Kane Hodder really is, and why he really is one of the goats of horror, is that he almost was killed doing a stunt like this almost exactly 10 years
Right.
before this. He does one a year before this on Avenging Force, and again here. It just shows he's mastered his fear, and he's also become a full professional by this point,
Yeah.
who can pull off an incredibly versatile stunt like this. I mean, look at it.
And
It's
again,
a showstopper.
being able to be in Jason makeup and costume allows also this scene to become record setting, because it doesn't have to look like literally a person. This guy's bulky, he's bumpy, he's got rags on and all that. It helped hide
Yeah.
what they were doing to protect Kane under there.
Another thing that clicked with me when I was watching this, it's interesting that Jason as a character, his element is really water, and he's here defeated at this point by fire.
Look at that explosion. That was real.
That was incredible.
It was an empty house, but they shot that. That was a real, nothing fake about it explosion. Now, I am
course.
confused. How does Jason end up at the dock without, why don't they see him walking up right now? Because he's going to be next to them in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Watch
yeah.
this. How are they not
Yeah, you're right.
being aware that he is right there? I mean, he had
Again,
to crawl out of the house and get to them.
There are supernatural elements at play here, and you can't
I know.
pick and choose that one thing can be possible and another
Yeah.
thing can't. So you just almost have to kind of go with it, and they've established reasoning for that.
Yeah. See, he's how did he get up the... Anyway. But I love that they did change him again. He is more exposed in
Yep.
terms of guts.
Even
and
his face
bones.
looks totally different.
Yeah.
I think it's a completely different sculpt.
It is.
here. Yeah.
Kane said in one of the commentaries that is a whole different costume at this point.
And what they did, that's really, really, really good, is you notice they gave his almost eyebrow areas, they are elevated so he looks pissed.
Yes.
And it really is cool. It's evocative as hell.
Yeah. This is, unfortunately, this was not the ending that
this is a
Buechler
this
wanted.
is a stretch. This is
So,
a stretch.
Did you know, Buechler's ending was still that the dad pops up, okay? But the dad was completely zombified, really decayed.
Yep.
There was 3 stages of decay that every time they cut back to him, he was going to be more and more decayed.
And they were probably afraid you wouldn't be able to identify who the character was if he was in that zombie form. Maybe you wouldn't identify that's her father. I'm just thinking.
This is a fun fact. That's John Carl Buechler right
Fun
here.
fact.
In this,
There he
this
is.
is cameo.
Oh, yeah, you can't miss him.
So that was one of I was telling you earlier. So that was the thing that Barbara Sachs did to John, where she just canceled that whole shoot. Now you can see
Wow.
test footage and makeup photos they did of the dad in the makeup. It looks great, but they never were able to shoot it. And then the idea was sort of that, like, now the lake has two undead. There's like a good and a bad sort of
and it's almost it's an inverse.
holding each other in balance.
That's right, because it's in balanced inverse.
Right.
Originally, it was the mother was the killer. The son comes up from the lake. Now it's the daughter is the innocent one, and the father comes up. The
Right.
parent comes up from the lake. So it's sort of an inverse.
I earlier when I was kind of giving the dad shit, like why does everyone love this guy when he's gone? He's clearly and I guess that's probably part of the character arc. They're trying to give the guy that almost redeems himself in death at the end and
He's
saves
redeemed
everybody.
himself.
Now, again, so we were supposed to see the decomposed dad grab Jason and pull him down. They drive off in the ambulance, and then we would cut back to the lake during the day where you see this fisherman, and he's fishing, and he's got something, and he's struggling, and it's like they're building this tension, like,
Oh my
like it's
God.
gonna be
I
Jason,
love this
right?
already.
But all of a sudden, boom, he pops it up, and it's a fish,
Oh
and you're
my
like,
God.
okay, and he wrangles with the fish for a second, but then Jason does pop back out of the water, classic Friday the 13th style, and he pulls the guy down, kind of showing that at the end of the day, the dad didn't control him. Almost that Jason defeated the dad.
Yeah, right.
And Jason is under there alive and lurking.
Well-
and that is in the deleted scenes. That did make it.
Well, again, like I was mentioning earlier, I think the producers, the director of this film, they have to be very careful because they've just spent now 2 movies bringing Jason back from the dead and bringing him back to the centerpiece of this franchise where he rightfully belonged all along.
Right.
And so to even sort of, you have to be really careful what you're suggesting to the audience because they don't want any sort of misunderstanding of where they want you to know this character will continue to come back as long as you go to the movie theater and support the movie.
Right.
Which clearly happened.
I mean, the critics, this did not get well received by critics.
It didn't get that Academy Award, you're saying? It didn't get that Federico Fellini-esque Academy Award?
No.
I still think it's very entertaining.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's still sold out, opening weekend and all that.
It did amazing on its opening weekend.
And
It made almost $9 million and was #1 at the box office.
I think in the climate, the cinema climate at the time, it did well for what it is, and how much it was edited.
And the reason why Joe and I, every episode, we talk about the landscape of all these other movies is to reinforce this notion of look at all the films a movie like this had to compete with.
Well, right.
From
Yeah,
all
exactly.
different,
Yeah,
not just within the horror genre where there was banger after banger after banger during this era, but just in terms of just movies. Every Friday night, you're competing with 2 or 3 other now iconic films.
Yep.
I don't know if that type of decade will ever be repeated in the film industry. I don't know. The 80s. It's an unbelievable decade.
Those times are gone. Like
Yeah.
the whole model for the way movies work and audiences want to watch movies is so different.
Yeah,
that
you're right.
It's just there was a heyday. Not to sound like some old guy, but
we are old guys. We are clearly old guys.
There was a heyday of cinema before us too that we don't know, but we also got to experience a really classic time in movies when a mega hit. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
absolutely.
But we got one every summer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or even twice a year sometimes. And now every once in a while you get a really great film. It's not like they're not out there, but
Yep.
the way we digest films so constantly now because of streaming and how many
and
movies are being made.
Films competing with television, which now is essentially just serialized films.
Right, exactly.
So
I swear, I literally, when there's like shows I like to watch, I will build up 2 episodes at a time, so I sit
yes.
for like a movie's length
Totally
every time.
agree.
So I feel like I get a little movie version of
Yep.
it.
I do almost the exact same thing. Anyway, we've gone
we
a little
go.
long this
know.
episode, so we're going to wrap it up for y'all so y'all can get on with your day and get on with your night or
Yeah.
actually go to bed or actually do something at work for once in your frickin' lives.
Yep.
But again, you guys know, 29 episodes in, all over the world, no matter where you are right now, if you're hearing my voice, if you're hearing Joe's voice, we just really want you to know how much we appreciate you and how much we thank you for joining us here watching Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, where Kane Hodder is introduced to the series. We've got a couple more movies to talk about going forward with Kane Hodder, so I'm super excited. Of course, next time we're going to be covering one of the Friday films that I have a real nostalgic connection to.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is 1989's Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan.
Yeah.
I believe it was probably the first Friday film I actually saw in the movie theater. I think it might have been the first one I actually saw in the movie theater. I know I saw it in the theater, but that's probably part of why. What about you? What did you
For me, it was like the cable Friday,
Yeah.
I was at that age where this was the first one that I was watching like over and over and over again because HBO was just like always playing it back in the day. So it was like the first one I digested hardcore a lot.
And there's so much to talk about with that one. That's sort of like just such a legendary kind of a right out of left field chapter of the Friday franchise. And then to think, as if it could get weirder, look at Part 9 goes even weirder. Even Part 10 goes bizarre.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about behind the scenes with
really
those next few movies, which led to why they're kind of disjointed in a way, Yeah,
and also over the next few episodes, we'll be talking about all the incredibly intense and acrimonious legal wrangling that starts happening within this franchise that really stalled out its potential for nearly decades.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interesting stuff to cover going forward, and we'll continue next episode, which will be unbelievably enough, episode 30 of Haddonfield Radio, otherwise known, I guess, as season 3, episode 8.
Yeah.
Wow, we're already almost 8. We've done 7 episodes already this season. Unbelievable.
I can't believe we're already sort of over the hump of Friday the 13th franchise.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy.
And I don't want time to go by fast because I've been having the absolute time of my life recording season 3 and recording these episodes and watching these movies with all you guys down here in Joe's basement. Am I right?
Yeah. I hope you guys got or enjoyed having a look down here.
Yeah, you're actually. I just realized you're literally down in the basement with us right now.
I was going to say yes. It's again changes in the channel as we grow, and so hope you're along for the ride. I hope you enjoyed seeing us.
But that notion made that so much more palatable.
Yeah.
That now you literally are down in this basement with us by watching us down here. I love that.
We'll see. Things are going to get smoothed out and as we go and do this more. But it's like I kind of wish actually we had done this when we did the 3D episode.
Yeah, if you guys could have seen us watching that movie with those stupid glasses on, you would have loved it.
But anyway.
Yeah, we love you guys so much and appreciate you more than you will ever know.
Yeah.
And wherever you are in the world, we hope that you're safe and healthy and happy. And we hope that you've had a good time hanging out and watching the 7th Friday the 13th with us, and we hope you'll come down in Joe's basement and watch the 8th next time.
Yeah.
And if you're a listener in the future, you can go do that right the F now. Am I right?
Yes.
So yeah, anyway. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just killer, mommy, killer.
Killer. Oh, I've got one more thing I'd like to add.
Oh boy. What language are you going to say Happy Halloween in this time? What language are we going with?
Well, believe it or not, I completely forgot. So
I didn't mean to call you out on it.
So we're going to do it all together in real time. That's going to be fun. Let's end the episode all together while I scramble here. Hold on. I got to go to my Google my trusty Google Translate.
I thought I was setting you up to have a good moment.
As soon as I started panicking.
Oh, man.
Hold on.
See, you can't win.
Hold on, let me get there. I'm gonna. Right. Any language you'd like?
Have you done Italian?
No.
Let's do Italian.
All right, ready? Let's hopefully I can pronounce everything here. All right, so let's find. We've got English.
It's a romantic language.
I love that. No, I'm sold on that.
It's a passionate language.
You know what? My mom is full-blooded Italian.
Mm-hmm. I'm almost.
One of the great Italian cooks you will ever know in your life.
His mom's food. I lived to go over there and get some of her Italian food when we were younger. Oh,
so true.
Oh my God.
And so I think Italian was the perfect choice. We'll dedicate this one to
when
my
we
mom.
lived together and he'd go visit his parents, I just wait for him to come back to the apartment because I'd be like, I know he's gonna have some food from his mom.
Oh boy. Okay, we're gonna give this a shot. Lead me back into it. Go ahead.
Okay, so the only thing I have left to say is, killer, mommy, killer.
So I guess, yeah, if there's nothing else to add, I guess my name, as always, has been Christian White.
And I'm Joe Francazio.
E vi auguro un felice Halloween. We love you.